Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city. And we start. Garrett Rivers wiped the oil off his hands with an old rag and glanced at the snowy peaks in the distance. Outside the windows of the Rocky Auto Repair Shop, the Colorado sun was slowly setting, painting the sky in the cool tones of sunset. It was the end of March, and the piercing cold of winter was still felt in the air, despite the approach of spring. Usually at this time, Garrett finished work and went home, where his wife Molly, a hot dinner, and the comfort of the family hearth were waiting for him. But today he stayed longer than usual. His head was occupied with vague, disturbing thoughts. There was no one else left in the workshop. The mechanics went home, wishing the boss good night. Garrett glanced around the empty garage, lifts lowered, tools laid out, puddles of oil on the floor, glistening in the dim light of the lamps. The silence was unusual and oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock and occasional gusts of wind from the street. He leaned wearily against the hood of a repaired Ford F-150 pickup truck, recalling the events of recent weeks. Nothing concrete happened, but Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that Molly was moving away from him. They have been married for 10 years, and during this time there have been ups and downs like everyone else. However, recently a certain coldness has appeared in her behavior. She often stayed somewhere after work or left without really explaining where. She answered questions evasively. Yes, on business, or I saw a friend. Garrett tried not to stress himself out. Molly has always been an independent and sociable woman. She could have her own secrets and personal space. And yet, something told him that trouble was brewing in their relationship. He took off his cap and ran his hand through his short, dark hair. He was 38 years old and had a strong build from daily hard work. His hands were calloused, his nails were always dirty with machine oil. That's how Molly knew him, a simple hard worker, the owner of a small business. She always said that she liked his reliability and honesty. But now Garrett wondered if she was okay with it. The front door slammed, and an echo echoed through the workshop. Garrett winced, snapping out of his thoughts. Standing on the threshold was Mike, his best friend and also a senior mechanic. A tall, lean man of about 40, with a permanent baseball cap stained with grease. "Hey, Harry, why are you here?" Mike asked loudly, walking across the hall. "It's 9 o'clock. Molly is probably worried." "Yes, now," Garrett responded, putting a smile on his face. "I was just thinking about something, so I stayed late." Mike looked at him intently, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Everything is fine? You haven't been yourself lately." Garrett looked away and shrugged. "Yes, everything is fine. Just tired. There's a lot to do. The quarterly report is coming, bills, taxes." He tried to sound casual. Mike nodded understandingly. "Well, Mark will help prepare the reports. He is our accountant from God. He can handle it." At the mention of Mark, I felt an unpleasant tingle inside. Mark Helton has been doing the books for their shop for the past couple of years. The guy is literate, slightly younger than Garrett, always smiling and witty. It seemed like a family friend. They sometimes went out to barbecues together. Mark was part of the company. But for some reason, lately Garrett caught himself inexplicably jealous when Mark walked into the workshop and Molly chatted animatedly with him. Nothing offensive, just friendly conversations. However, Garrett now remembered that Molly had mentioned Mark more often than usual in recent weeks. Either she will consult with him about tax deductions, or she will praise his joke. Garrett hadn't thought much of it then, but now. Now everything seemed like a worrying sign. "Yeah," was all he answered Mike, feeling his shoulders tense. "Mark is really great." Mike didn't seem to notice the change in his friend's mood. He patted Garrett on the shoulder. "Okay, shut up and go home. Rest, and tomorrow we will continue to disassemble this engine with renewed vigor." He nodded towards the disassembled engine lying on the workbench. "Thank you, Mike." "I'll do that," Garrett replied gratefully. When the door closed behind Mike, Garrett stood in silence for another minute. Then he took a deep breath, trying to push away the bad feelings. Just tired and stressed, he told himself. You cannot suspect the worst without reason. Molly loves me. Everything will be fine. He reached out and turned off the light. The workshop was plunged into darkness. Only Garrett's silhouette appeared for a moment against the background of the window with the last reflections of the sunset. Stepping outside, he felt a cold wind hit his face. Wrapping his jacket tighter around him, Garrett headed to his pickup truck. Home was only 10 minutes away, a cozy cottage on the outskirts of a small town north of Denver. Along the way, Garrett turned on the radio, trying to distract himself with music. Country rock played quietly from the speakers, and the dark silhouettes of pine trees flashed past the windows. Tomorrow, April 1 cent was spinning in his head. Molly always loved April Fool's Day and played pranks. Perhaps these thoughts make him nervous. Last year, for example, she smeared toothpaste on the door handle of Garrett's car, and he spent a long time cleaning off the mint smell from his fingers. Another time, she replaced sugar with salt minor tomfoolery, to which he usually just shook his head with a smile. What is she up to this time, he thought, smiling involuntarily. Probably cooking something. For the first time that evening, his thoughts turned away from the gloomy course. He knew that no matter how much Molly fooled around, she did it from the heart to make him laugh, to bring a spark to everyday life. And even though some of the pranks were stupid, he loved her for her mischievous nature. As Garrett pulled into his driveway, he noticed a light in the living room windows. Molly was at home. His heart skipped a beat. Despite his worries, he was still happily rushing to her after a long day. Turning off the engine, Garrett climbed out of the car and paused for a moment, looking at the warm light pouring from the windows of their house. This picture always gave him a feeling of peace, his own home built on a strong foundation of love and trust. The next morning, April 1st, the sun shone brightly over the snow-capped mountains, promising a clear but still cold day. Garrett woke up early, as usual, and quietly climbed out of bed, trying not to wake Molly. She snored softly, wrapped in a blanket. Looking at her sleeping face, Garrett felt a surge of tenderness and at the same time, a slight anxiety. After all, today was the very day when Molly usually started her pranks. In the kitchen, he made himself some coffee, thinking about the day ahead. The workshop was planned for routine work, nothing special. Thoughts flitted to Molly. What was she up to? Her latest jokes were harmless, but yesterday's oddities in her behavior still haunted her. When Molly came downstairs, Garrett was already getting ready to go to the workshop. She looked fresh and cheerful. Her reddish hair was casually pinned up, and she had a mysterious smile on her face. "Good morning," she sang, kissing her husband on the cheek. "Happy April Fools," Garrett smiled back, trying to read a hint of a joke in her eyes. "You seem suspiciously happy today." "Can't I be in a good mood?" Molly asked slyly, pouring herself some coffee. "Of course you can." He took a sip from his mug. "I just know you're probably already planning something." Molly laughed, leaning her hip against the tabletop. "Maybe I'm planning it, maybe I'm not. You will live in ignorance and fear all day." She winked, and Garrett couldn't help but smile wider. At such moments, she was so sweet and playful that all worries receded. He kissed her goodbye. "Try not to make me go gray before my time, okay?" "No promises," she answered cheerfully, walking him to the door. As he was leaving, Garrett looked back again. Molly, sipping coffee, was already leafing through a magazine, her eyes sparkling innocently in his direction. Was it his imagination, or was she really smiling slyly under her breath? He waved his hand and got into the pickup truck. There was a long day ahead, and one could only guess at what moment and how the rally would unfold. Things went on as usual in the workshop. Clients stopped by for an oil change and towed an old SUV for transmission repairs. Mike and the guys plunged into work. At noon, while snacking on a sandwich right in the garage, Garrett realized that he had been waiting for a trick all morning. Maybe Molly changed something for him at lunch. But no, he bought the sandwich himself on the way. Or will he call with something stupid? The phone was silent. "You're not yourself today," Mike remarked, emerging from under the hood of the client's car. You keep looking around as if you're expecting a ghost. Garrett chuckled. Yes, Molly probably wants to arrange something. You know, the 1st of April. Mike laughed. Well then, hold on. After her story with the fake lottery ticket, nothing will surprise me. Garrett winced, remembering the draw the year before. Molly gave him a lottery ticket for his birthday, on which all the numbers seemed to match the jackpot. How he was already making plans, how happy he was, and how stupid he felt when he learned that it was a joke. Yeah, she mastered me then, he shook his head. But it's okay, I'm on the alert. However, nothing unusual happened until the evening. Work distracted Garrett, and by the end of the day he had almost forgotten about his worries. At about 6 in the evening, having dismissed the employees to go home, he changed from his work overalls to jeans and a clean shirt. A cold wind blew outside, the weather was deteriorating, light rain and snow began to fall. Colorado in the spring, Garrett thought as he got into the pickup. As he pulled up to the house, he noticed that Molly's car was not in the driveway. She usually returned before him. Strange. The house looked dark and lifeless, not a single light. Unusual. Molly liked to turn on the porch light for his arrival. Garrett stepped out of the truck, anxiety tightening in his chest again. Maybe she was staying at a friend's place or at the store. He went up to the porch and inserted the key into the lock, but the door suddenly opened by itself. It was not locked. Entering the house, Garrett felt for the light switch. The living room was illuminated by the soft light of the lamp. There was order in the room, but it was somehow uncomfortably quiet. There was an envelope on the coffee table. My heart skipped a beat. He walked closer and saw his name written in Molly's handwriting. For Garrett. Feeling his breath catch in his throat, he hurriedly opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside is a letter, a few lines written in my wife's neat handwriting. Dear Garrett, I'm sorry it's like that. I'd like to check out. Please don't look for me. I met someone else, and I can't continue to deceive either you or myself. You are a good person and don't deserve pain, but you can't control your heart. Goodbye. Molly. He reread these lines 3 times, not believing his eyes. The room swam before him. I'm leaving. I met someone else. It was as if a cold wave washed over him from head to toe. The letter trembled in my hand. Garrett felt his world falling apart. All the fears, all the nightmares, here they are, on paper, written by the hand of the woman you love. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, this is some kind of mistake. My heart was pounding like crazy. He rushed up the stairs to the bedroom. What if she was still there? What if it was a misunderstanding? The bedroom was in darkness. There is an empty space on the floor where the suitcase usually stood. The closet is open. Several shelves are empty. His head began to spin. No, this is really happening. Garrett came downstairs, staggering as if drunk. There was a constriction in my chest, my throat constricted from the approaching sobs. He looked at the letter again, still hoping to find the words prank or joke. But no, the words of farewell merged before my eyes. In a panic, he grabbed the phone and dialed Molly's number. The beeps 1, 2, 3. No one answered. The phone then switched to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing again. The feeling of helplessness covered me like an avalanche. Where could she have gone? Who is this other? With horror, the name popped into my head, Mark. It can't be. They were just friends. No. He dialed Mike's number, his hands shaking so much that he barely hit the right keys. Hello? A friend's surprised voice rang out. Mike, Garrett said hoarsely. Molly, she left. What? Mike was confused. Where did you go? She left a letter. She says she met someone else. Lord, she left me. The voice broke into a scream. There was silence on the line, then Mike answered alarmedly. I'll be right there. Hold on, Harry. Garrett dropped his phone on the couch. He couldn't breathe. Everything around seemed to have lost its meaning. Yesterday, he still kissed his wife, but today she is not there. Simply no. 10 minutes later, a car pulled up. It was Mike. He burst into the house, calling. Garrett, where are you? Garrett sat on the living room floor, his back against the couch, still clutching the crumpled note. His eyes were dry, no tears came, only frozen horror. Mike ran up to him. "Damn it, buddy." He squatted down next to me. "What's happened?" Garrett silently handed him the letter. While Mike read, Garrett covered his face with his hands. It seemed to him that this was a nightmare. This simply couldn't happen. "Damn." Mike cursed quietly after reading it. I couldn't even imagine. Whoever it was, the bastard. He carefully placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Are you sure she's not with a friend? Maybe this is a mistake?" "The closet is empty. There is no suitcase," Garrett responded dully from behind his palms. "Several shelves. Looks like she took things." Mike looked around. "She doesn't have a car. So she left. Didn't you notice anything? No hints?" Garrett lowered his hands and stared at one point. "There were thoughts, but I drove them away. Lord, Mike, I felt it yesterday. And this morning everything was so normal." She joked, smiled. How could she? His throat was tight, but he still couldn't cry. He could only pound his fist on the carpet. Mike pulled him into a tight hug. "Hold on, brother. It's a gut punch, but we'll figure it out. Let's first find out who she might have gone to." Garrett pulled away, his face flushed with anger through the pain. "I think," he swallowed, "I think it's Mark." "Accountant?" Mike widened his eyes in shock. "What are you saying, Mark?" "They spent a lot of time together," Garrett continued through clenched teeth. "How many times have I seen them laughing, whispering? And she often lingered, saying that she was discussing bills with him. What if it was not just about bills?" Mike swore. "If he's involved, I swear I'll kill the bastard." Garrett clenched his fists to the white knuckles. The thought that his friend and accountant could betray him like that burned his soul like a hot iron. We need to check," he muttered, getting up on unsteady legs. "I'll go to him. I'll find out." Mike jumped up. "I'm with you." They ran out of the house into the drizzling, icy rain. Night had already fallen on the town. The wind was driving heavy clouds across the sky. Mike got behind the wheel of his pickup because Garrett's hands were still shaking, and he didn't know if he could drive. As they raced down the highway toward Mark's house, Garrett suddenly felt a strange thought. What if? What if this was a terrible prank? The 1st of April. Maybe Molly and Mark decided to joke. But no, who would drag jokes so far packing things, leaving a letter? It was too serious. And if she's really with Mark, what kind of joke is that? It's betrayal. Mark's house was in the center of the town. When they arrived, Garrett jumped out of the car before Mike could brake. The lights were on in the windows. He rushed to the door and began knocking furiously. Mark himself opened the door. A look of confusion flashed across his face at the sight of the wet, furious Garrett. "Garrett, what happened?" he began, but didn't have time to finish. Garrett pushed him in the chest, tumbled inside the house. "Where is she?" he growled, his eyes sparkling with fury. "Who? What are you talking about?" Mark panicked, backing away. Mike appeared next, his gaze darker than a cloud. "Molly," Garrett shouted, grabbing Mark by the collar of his shirt. "Where is Molly? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "Garrett, are you crazy?" "I don't." But Garrett snapped. He punched Mark in the jaw. He flew back against the wall, hitting his head with a thud. "Fuck you, Harry," Mike breathed out, trying to hold his friend, but it was too late. Mark pressed his hand to his split lip, his eyes wide with shock and anger. "You're crazy. What's happening?" Garrett stepped forward, his whole body trembling. "Molly's gone, you bastard. And she left a letter saying that she had met someone else. Is it you?" "I was afraid to write my name, but I know." Mark looked from Garrett to the menacing Mike, then spat out some blood. "Look, I have no idea where Molly is. I haven't seen her today. She herself said that she was planning a prank on you." Garrett froze, clenching his fists. "What other prank?" Mark nervously wiped his lip with the back of his hand. "She called me this afternoon and said she wanted to scare you, pretend she was leaving. She asked if I could confirm, if anything, that she had someone." Garrett felt the world swing around him again. He shook his head. What? So this is all a joke. Mark smiled wryly through the pain. Well, yes, it's the 1st of April. She thought it would be funny if you believed that she was leaving you. Then she was going to come home and say it was a prank. Mike exhaled, lowering his fists. Edgy. What a bitch. Garrett staggered, clutching the doorframe. So, she didn't leave? Is this not true? Mark rose to his feet, wincing. I don't know what she thinks, but it really was her idea. She asked me to play along with her if you suddenly called me in a panic. Like confirming that yes, she's having an affair. He shook his head. I refused, by the way. He said it was too much. And where is she now? Garrett asked quietly, hope mixed with rage splashing in his eyes. I have no idea. She probably went somewhere for a couple of hours to make everything look believable, Mark responded. She said that she would return in the evening. Garrett stood there, speechless. His whole hell, in which he spent the last hour, turned out to be someone's evil joke. He didn't know what to feel relief that Molly hadn't left, or furious that she let him live through this. Mike grabbed Garrett by the shoulder. Let's go home. If it's a joke, it's better to wait there. Garrett nodded silently. His gaze fell on Mark. And I'll talk to you later, he muttered. Although, if Mark was telling the truth, it turns out that he is not a lover, but just an accomplice in a stupid idea. But Garrett could no longer shake off the vile suspicion. Mark didn't answer, he just lowered his eyes tiredly. The journey back took forever. When he and Mike burst into Garrett's house, the lights were already on in the living room, and Molly was standing there alive, unharmed, not gone anywhere forever. She didn't even have time to take off her coat. She had the same envelope in her hands. "Oh God, Harry," she exclaimed when she saw her husband. "You're so fast." Her eyes widened when she noticed a gloomy Mike behind him. "What's happening?" Molly was wary. Garrett felt a fire burning in his chest. He rushed to her. "Is this a joke?" he growled, clenching his fists. "You call this a joke?" Molly shook her head, retreating. "Harry, I'm sorry. I didn't think that you were serious." "I didn't think so?" he shouted, shaking the letter, which by some miracle he still held in his hand. "I found this and decided that my life was over. How could you come up with this?" Molly threw the envelope on the table and tried to touch it. "Forgive me, please. This is stupid. I went too far. I wanted to joke." Garrett recoiled from her hands. There were tears in his eyes, but his voice bubbled with anger. "Joking. Telling your husband that you are leaving him for someone else is funny, do you think?" Behind Garrett, Mike swore muffledly. "Molly, you're completely crazy." Molly flushed, crumpling her coat in her hands. "I didn't expect you to rush to Mark," she blurted out. "Mark called me himself and said that you came and fought. God, Garrett, what have you done? What did you do?" He couldn't believe his ears. "Think about yourself, what you've done." I almost went crazy with grief. She sobbed, tears flowed from her eyes. Sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just a fool." For several seconds he watched her cry, and his heart gradually cooled with rage. Exhaustion and emptiness gave way to him. Molly rushed to him and wrapped her arms around him. "Forgive me, honey. It really was a terrible joke. I was already on my way back to confess. I'm so sorry." Garrett stood like a stone. Her embrace seemed alien to him. Then he slowly raised his arms and hugged her, more to stop these sobs. "SHH" was all he could say through force. Molly sobbed on his chest. "Will you forgive me? Please." I was scared myself when I realized how far I had gone. He was silent, feeling Mike behind him awkwardly shifting from foot to foot. I need to think." Garrett finally squeezed out quietly, pulling away. "This is too much." Molly wiped her tears with her hand, nodding. Yes, of course. I understand everything. This is unforgivable. But now, I didn't go anywhere and wasn't really going to. I don't have anyone. That was a lie." He glanced sideways at her. She spoke so convincingly. Is the truth just a joke? But then why does the heart still clench with pain, as if it happened in reality? Come on, I guess I'll go. Mike broke the silence. His voice sounded tense. Glad you figured it out. Garrett just nodded without turning his head. He still had nothing to say. And, Molly, Mike said at the door, jokes like that are a shitty idea. She lowered her head and the door closed behind Mike. Left alone, Garrett and Molly stood in the living room, not looking at each other. Finally, Molly tried to take his hand. Harry. But he took a step back. He needed to be left alone, otherwise he might relapse. I need to clear my head, he said briefly, and, turning around, left the house, loudly slamming the door. The night air burned my lungs with icy freshness. Garrett walked down the porch and stood, staring into the darkness. Everything was mixed up in my chest. Anger, relief, resentment, mistrust. Trying to digest it all seemed like an impossible task. One thing he knew for sure. Something had broken irrevocably that night. Even if it was a joke, he would never be able to forget that pain. He looked up at the windows of the house, where Molly's shadow flickered. His wife, the very person he trusted most in the world, made him feel like the most miserable and humiliated fool. And even though now everything seemed to be back, she never left, but a sediment, like cold ashes, settled on her soul. Garrett closed his eyes, remembering Mark's words. She thought it would be funny. How callous do you have to be to find this funny? He always considered Molly kind and loving. Was he wrong? Or did he himself somehow push her to such an act? The cold wind ruffled his hair. Shivering from cold and shock, Garrett slowly sank down onto the porch steps and covered his face with his hands. The ensuing silence of the first April evening was broken only by his heavy breathing. For the first time in years, Garrett Rivers felt truly alone in this world. The day after the ill-fated April Fool's evening, the Rivers house was plunged into tense silence. The morning turned out to be cloudy, low gray clouds hung over the roofs, and cold rain and snow were drizzling. Garrett woke up on the living room couch. He never returned to his marital bed that night. He didn't want to see Molly, didn't want to talk. I just wanted silence and loneliness in order to understand how to live further with this new feeling. The sun was just breaking when he went into the kitchen. To my surprise, I found Molly there. She was sitting at the table, wrapped in a warm cardigan, with a cup of tea, already cold, standing in front of her. There were circles under her eyes, apparently. She also hadn't slept most of the night. Hearing her husband's steps, Molly raised her head sharply. For a moment, hope flashed in her eyes. "Hello?" she said uncertainly. Garrett nodded silently as he walked over to the coffee maker. He felt her gaze on him, full of pain and remorse, but did not know what to say. The words got stuck in my throat. Having poured himself some coffee, he remained standing without turning his back to her. "I made breakfast," Molly said quietly, pointing to the pan covered with a plate. "Your favorite eggs and bacon." Garrett did smell bacon, but he had no appetite. He shook his head. "I don't want to. Thank you." She sighed heavily. For some time, they stood silently in the same room, separated by a few steps and something much larger, an invisible wall of exclusion. Finally, Molly couldn't stand it anymore. "Harry, please, talk to me. I'm really sorry. I thought about it all night. I was a fool." He took a sip of bitter coffee without answering. "I love you," she continued pleadingly. "Do you know this? I never really wanted to lose you. It was a terrible, stupid prank." "It's hard to believe," Garrett responded quietly, looking out the window into the cloudy morning. "After such words on paper, it's hard to believe that you love." Molly sobbed. "I understand. I know it's all my fault. But please give me a chance to make things right. I'll do anything." He was silent. He wanted to cover his ears. Her tears and pleas evoked conflicting feelings in him. His mind screamed that she had crossed the boundaries, but his heart, in spite of everything, still beat for her. Suddenly, Molly's phone, lying on the table, rang. Both involuntarily flinched at the sharp sound. The screen flashed. Mark's work. Garrett glanced at his wife. She flushed and hastily turned off the call. "He's probably about a tax report," she hastily explained. "I asked him a couple of days ago to prepare something." Garrett didn't answer, but yesterday's suspicion stirred unpleasantly within him. Yes, Mark assured me that it was all just a joke. Molly also insists that she has no one. But can these words be trusted now? Molly, as if sensing what he was thinking about, stood up and approached. I will break off all communication with him outside of work. If necessary, we will fire him and find another accountant. If only you would forgive me. Garrett placed the mug on the table a little harder than necessary. The ceramic hit the wooden surface loudly. No, we won't fire you. I don't want to wash dirty linen in public. Molly blinked in surprise. She obviously thought that he would want to get rid of Mark after what happened. You are sure? She asked carefully. Garrett shrugged. Let him work. He does a good job. Personal nonsense, I hope, aside. These words were not easy for him, but he did not want scandals. If Mark really is just a victim of Molly's stupid request, then he shouldn't break his working relationship over it. And if it's not easy, then it's better to keep the enemy closer for now, he thought gloomily. Molly touched his hand softly. Thank you. I appreciate it. You are so noble, Harry. He chuckled and removed his hand. Nobility had nothing to do with it, rather expectancy. He could not stay home now and continue this difficult conversation. So he looked at his watch and said, I have to go to the workshop. Lots of work. Of course, Molly responded quickly. I will call you later. Yes, he said shortly, putting on his jacket. She went to kiss him on the cheek goodbye, but Garrett pretended not to notice this movement, stepping towards the door. On the way to work, he tried to pull himself together. My head was pounding. So much had happened in just one day. We had to drive slowly. The drizzle and sticking snow turned the route into a mess. And in this gray, wet haze, through the noise of the windshield wipers on the glass, an image appeared in Garrett's head again and again. Molly packs her things, leaves. A letter with someone else's words of love for another. He clenched the steering wheel. What should he do now? He arrived at the workshop before everyone else. Going inside, he turned on the light and sat down on a bench against the wall. Here, among the smell of oils and iron, was his refuge. Here everything is clear and simple. If something is broken, you look for the problem and fix it. How can he fix what is broken inside him? Half an hour later, the mechanics began to arrive. Mike looked into the box and saw the boss. Hello, how are you? It could have been better, Garrett grinned joylessly. Mike shook his head sympathetically, leaning on the doorframe. Well, what a night yesterday. How are you holding up? I'm trying, Garrett answered honestly. I decided to leave everything as it is. Molly says she didn't have anyone. It was really a joke. Mike squinted in disbelief. And you believe? Garrett looked at the rain-blurred Mike through the doorway. Don't know. I want to believe. At least for now. Mike paused, then said, If you need time or rest, I'll cover. You don't have to go out for a couple of days. Thank you, friend, but work will at least distract me. Garrett shook his head. I'll be busy here with screws, and maybe I'll think less. Mike sighed. Okay. Know that I'm here if anything happens. I know, Garrett smiled weakly. The day dragged on painfully long. Having met the client, Garrett put on his usual good-natured mask. He repaired cars automatically, trying to drown out his prickly thoughts. However, every time the phone issued a notification or rang, my heart skipped a beat. Wasn't it Molly? But the wife didn't call, she just sent a message around noon. How are you? I'm very sorry. I love you. He didn't answer, not knowing what. Late in the evening, before the workshop closed, Mark appeared. More precisely, first a message came from him. Hi, can I come in? I'll bring the tax documents. Garrett just responded dryly, Go ahead. He understood that Mark probably wanted not only to take care of business, but also to discuss yesterday. Garrett himself was not sure that he was ready to talk calmly. His anger was still too strong. But there was no point in avoiding it either. Mark appeared with a folder of papers and his usual friendly smile, but that smile looked forced. There was a dark bruise under his eye. Garrett remembered with discomfort how he had punched him. Hello, Mark said carefully, entering the workshop's office space. I have prepared a declaration here, as you asked. Hi, Garrett muttered, accepting the folder. He sat down at the table, ran his eyes through the numbers, trying not to look at the guest again. Mark shifted from foot to foot. Look, I wanted to apologize for what happened. Garrett looked up at him with a hard look. Apologize? For what exactly? Mark cleared his throat. Well, this stupid idea. I should have warned you right away when she contacted me. Why didn't you warn me? Garrett asked harshly. Was it funny watching me go crazy? No, Mark caught himself, raising his hands. Hell, of course not. I didn't think that everything would turn out like this. I actually told her that the idea was lousy. But Molly assured me that she herself would tell you everything in a couple of hours, that you wouldn't have time to do anything. He stopped short, apparently realizing how stupid the excuses sounded. In general, I'm glad you figured it out, he muttered. Molly called and said you, well, didn't kick her out. Garrett's heart twitched painfully. He imagined what Molly was talking about with Mark, but he didn't want to think about the two of them right now. Yes, I decided to give her a chance to make amends, he said slowly. And you too. Mark raised his eyebrows. To me? We'll assume that you also stumbled. I believed in her crazy idea. We're all friends after all. The words, all friends, came with bitterness. Mark's face turned pink and he nodded. Certainly. Thank you, Harry. I promise nothing like this again. I'm sure, Garrett snapped, closing the folder with papers. This is all. Yes, Mark answered quietly. After hesitating, he added, if you want, I can transfer your affairs to another accountant so that you can feel calmer. No need, Garrett stood up. Work is work. Let's close the topic on personal matters, and that's it. Mark tried to squeeze out a smile. Fine. You are a strong man, Harry. Not everyone could. Let's do without it, Garrett interrupted him, offering his hand. For some reason, he wanted to send Mark away as quickly as possible, but maintain the appearance of a normal relationship. He hastily shook the outstretched hand. Okay, sorry again for everything. See you later, Mark, Garrett replied dryly. When Mark left, Garrett sank into a chair and covered his face with his hands. A sickening wave rose in his chest. Here he was, his friend and partner, smiling sweetly, although just yesterday Garrett was sure that it was this man who drove off with his wife. Lie or truth? How much of what Mark and Molly said is the real truth? Knocking at Mark's house, he expected to find them together, but Molly was not there. Only a letter and a suitcase would have convinced him completely. But he managed to see the empty shelves, and Molly was really leaving, albeit for a couple of hours. That is, it wasn't all that fake. She really was capable of leaving, at least for a while, just to mislead him. And one more thing, Mark. Garrett could not get out of his head their friendly correspondence, friendly meetings, which now contained hints in hindsight. Maybe he's being paranoid, but Molly and Mark have gotten suspiciously close over the past year. Even if there was nothing physically, emotionally. Was the boundary crossed? Who knows if they weren't laughing behind his back at how gullible he was. This thought made the blood pound in my temples. The box door creaked overhead, and Mike looked out. Everything is fine. Yes, Garrett answered briefly, lowering his hands. Mike didn't leave, but came closer. Look, I hate to say this, but I don't believe her. Garrett smiled bitterly. I myself don't know what to believe anymore. A friend sat opposite. What are you going to do now? Will you pretend nothing happened? I don't know yet, Garrett answered honestly. I'm not ready to get a divorce right away. I love her no matter what. A fool, probably. Mike shook his head. Love is evil. But be careful, Harry. Such an act does not arise out of nowhere. Do you think there is smoke without fire? Garrett asked quietly, afraid, but expecting to hear an answer. Mike hesitated. Lately there have been rumors, but I didn't pay attention. They were chatting about seeing your wife with some man in a restaurant a couple of weeks ago. I asked with whom they said he looked like Mark, but I still waved him off. I thought it was bullshit, probably due to work. And after yesterday I thought, Garrett felt his fingers go cold. Restaurant a couple of weeks ago. He recalled, I think there was a day when Molly said she was dating a friend. Who was talking? He asked tensely. Yes, mutual acquaintances, a married couple. They also had dinner there that evening and saw Molly sitting with a man. We didn't see any hugs or kisses, we just sat close and talked. Why didn't you tell me right away? Garrett's voice trembled. I didn't want to convey nonsense to you, Mike sighed. You never know, maybe it's really a work meeting. But now, he spread his arms. Garrett's eyes darkened. If this is true, then Molly lied twice. And perhaps yesterday's prank was doubly cruel. She used a real connection, but made it look like a joke, so as not to be held accountable for what she had done. Can you find out more? He asked Mike hoarsely. He nodded. I'll try to talk to these friends and find out the details. Garrett clenched his fists. He felt a dark suspicion growing inside him, threatening to overwhelm him. Thanks, Mike, he said quietly. And don't say a word to anyone else, okay? Of course, replied the friend. Take care of yourself, do you hear? Don't make things up without facts. Garrett nodded, following Mike with his eyes. How can you not go too far? The facts could turn out to be worse than any guesses. A week has passed since the April Fool's incident. Outward calm began to return to the Rivers house, but tension simmered beneath the thin crust of reconciliation. Garrett was still withdrawn and taciturn. Molly tried not to put pressure. She was overcome with guilt, flattered her husband with attention, she cooked his favorite dishes, tried to be home on time, told him where she was going. She hoped that time would heal the wound and everything would return to normal. However, Garrett felt that the norm no longer existed. Every time Molly left the room to talk on the phone, his heart sank. He would like to read every text message from her. He fought with himself, trying not to become paranoid, but the whisper of doubt was growing louder in his head. In the second week of April, Mike got what he promised. In the evening, when the workshop was empty, he came to Garrett with a tense face. There is news. Garrett looked up from the disassembled carburetor. Well, Mike shook his head. Bad ones, I'm afraid. I talked to our friends, John and Linda Parker. They actually saw Molly 2 weeks ago at the old ranch restaurant, with a man. Garrett's heart skipped a beat. He had no doubt who the man was. Are they sure? The voice broke into a whisper. We're sure, Mike confirmed grimly. Linda knows Molly well by sight. She was surprised that you weren't there. She said that she wanted to come up to say hello, but did not interfere because, as it seemed to her, you were having a very deep conversation about something. Mike fell silent, but Garrett understood. His friend was keeping silent about the most difficult thing. Tell me everything, he croaked. Mike pursed his lips. Linda says that as they were leaving, she noticed through the window Molly and this guy. Well, they were holding hands across the table. An image flashed before Garrett's eyes. A dim restaurant, candles, his wife sitting opposite Mark and gently squeezing his hand. Nausea rose in my throat. Thank you for finding out, he said tensely, turning away to hide a grimace of pain. Listen, it's not 100% yet, Mike said softly, touching his friend's shoulder. Maybe they were discussing their stupid plan, and she thanked him. He himself did not believe in these words. Garrett smiled bitterly. Yes, I thanked you. Very warm. Mike frowned. What will you do? Garrett straightened up, his eyes sparkling with cold determination. I will find out the truth. Until the end. How? The friend became wary. I'll keep an eye on her, he answered firmly. If they continue to meet, I will catch them. Do you want my help? Mike asked quietly. Garrett shook his head. I can handle it for now. But thank you. And not a word to anyone. Of course, Mike nodded. Be careful, Harry. But Garrett was already making a plan in his mind. On Friday night, Molly, as she was putting dinner on plates, casually said, Tomorrow, I'll probably go to the city to do some shopping, okay? I want to choose a gift for you. She faltered. Well, just like that. Garrett looked up. Certainly. How long will you stay? Molly shrugged, avoiding his gaze. About 5 or 6 hours, I think. I'll go after breakfast. He nodded and went back to eating. My heart began to beat faster. Saturday, a lot of time. Isn't this a reason to see Mark? At night, after making sure Molly was asleep, Garrett quietly got out of bed. He walked over to her purse hanging on the back of the chair and carefully checked the inside pocket. She took the phone into the bedroom and put it on the nightstand, but her wallet and other small things were here. Inside was a small piece of paper folded in half. Garrett took it out and unfolded it under the moonlight by the window. The note read, Saturday, 11 o'clock, home. No signature, no address, just that. A strange anxiety struck him. Whose house? Perhaps someone's memo. What if it's a message from Mark? His house. Garrett remembered that Mark lived alone. His wife was long gone, or not at all. A secluded place. And if we're going to meet secretly, that's the most logical thing to do. Saturday, 11 o'clock, home, sounds too much like a date arrangement. Garrett felt anger welling up in his chest. So, despite all the pleas for forgiveness, she continues, or is he going to continue? Maybe he wants to say goodbye to him. Or is this a new lie, and they never stopped? He was shaking. He carefully folded the note back and returned it to his purse, trying to place everything as it was. He barely slept the rest of the night, lying motionless next to his wife, who snuggled trustingly in her sleep. The thought was beating in my head. A little more, and I will find out the whole truth. In the morning, Molly behaved as usual. She kissed him, getting ready to leave, and listed the stores where she was going. Garrett nodded, putting on a mask of calm. He even helped her clear snow from her car after an overnight snowfall in April. Molly's car disappeared around the bend toward Denver, and Garrett immediately ran to his pickup truck. Keeping a respectful distance, he followed. The weather cleared up. The bright sun blinded the eyes, shining on the white blanket of snow. On any other weekend, Garrett would have enjoyed this morning. Perhaps he and his wife would have gone out into nature for a walk. But now there was only bitterness and cold determination in him. He followed Molly's car for about half an hour, trying not to catch her eye among other traffic. But she didn't seem to look back. As promised, I first stopped at the shopping center. There, making sure that she had parked at the entrance, Garrett stopped at a distance. Molly actually entered the mall and spent about an hour inside. She came out with one package. It seems like she really bought him something. This detail slightly shook his confidence. Maybe she really was just for shopping. But the note, he couldn't forget about the note. At 10:50, as scheduled, Molly left the city, heading not back home, but east to the suburbs. Garrett tensed and followed. 20 minutes later, it became clear that they were heading towards Mark Helton's house. My heart started pounding in my ears. Home, 11 o'clock, everything fits. Molly turned onto a familiar street with cottages. To avoid attracting attention, Garrett drove a little further and parked around the corner, at the house across the street, looking in the mirror. The wife's car stopped at house number 28. Mark lived there. My throat is dry. He saw the door open, and a male silhouette appeared on the threshold. Molly jumped out of the car and hurried towards the house. Mark led her inside, looking around. Garrett gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to take off and run there immediately, but something held him back. We need to make them feel safe, he thought coldly, caught red-handed, with no way to get away. He got out of the pickup and quickly, stealthily, crossed the street, hiding behind a hedge. Approaching house 28, I began to listen. Muffled voices came from inside. He recognized Molly's laugh, a quiet, nervous laugh. Then Mark's voice. I know we're taking risks, but I missed you. Me too, Molly answered, barely audible. He doesn't suspect anything? Mark asked. I don't know. It seems not, she sighed. He was cold, but it's hard for me to understand. After everything came to light, what did he say? Mark's voice sounded tense. He was beside himself, screaming. But then he forgave. He said he would try to understand. Molly whispered. I can't believe it, Mark muttered. You're lucky, you also have a house, a business, everything is with you. Don't say that, she said irritably. That's not why I stayed. I love him. Or rather, I loved him. Everything is confusing. But me too. Mark didn't finish. There was the sound of footsteps, perhaps moving closer to the window, and Garrett pressed his back against the wall, afraid of being noticed. His heart was pounding. They spoke frankly, and his worst guesses were confirmed. Everything came up means they really had something, since it came up. I forgave. The house, the business with you, Mark seemed to care about her situation. Apparently, he was jealous that she didn't leave. Garrett clenched his fists. He waited a couple more minutes. Silence suddenly reigned inside, then a dull sound was heard as if something had fallen over or they were hugging each other, leaning against the furniture. I couldn't stand it anymore. He rushed to the door and pressed the handle. It was locked. Then he walked around to the side where he remembered the living room window was. The curtains were not tightly closed. Looking carefully, he saw how inside, in the middle of the room, Molly and Mark merged in a kiss. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, her eyes closed. Mark held her close, bowing his head. Everything flashes red before Garrett's eyes. The next moment he was already pounding on the window with his fist with all his might. The glass shook, but held. But inside, the couple bounced away from each other as if scalded. Garrett rushed back to the front door and drummed. "Open up, creature. I saw everything," he roared, forgetting about everything. The door opened slightly and Mark's pale face appeared. At that same second, Garrett kicked the door wide open, throwing Mark back. He tripped and fell. Molly stood in the hallway, covering her mouth with her hands. "Oh my God, Garrett," she wheezed, her face losing color. "So it wasn't a joke, right?" he shouted, entering the house, towering over the prone Mark. "Do you think I'm blind?" Molly rushed towards him, trying to grab his hand. "Harry, please." But he threw it away with a gesture. "Don't you dare touch me." "There," he pointed a trembling finger at Mark. "Let your friend console you now." Mark stood up, raising his palms in a conciliatory gesture. "Garrett, calm down, let's talk." But Garrett hit him again, right in the cheekbone. Molly screamed. Mark staggered, clutching his face. "You were like a brother to me," Garrett shouted in his face, feeling spit flying from his lips. "What were you doing behind my back?" "Stop it," Molly screamed, crying, clutching her husband's shoulder, trying to pull him away. "Don't touch him. It's not his fault." Garrett turned to her with such fury that she recoiled. "It's not his fault? Whose? Yours? Okay, I'll touch you now too." He grabbed Molly's forearm. She screamed in pain. "Let go." Mark stepped forward. "Garrett, that's enough. She's already been punished." "Shut up," Garrett barked. "You will both be punished." He pushed Molly forward towards the door. I went to the car. Home. She trudged out into the street, sobbing. Garrett then turned to Mark. He retreated, holding his blue cheekbone. "If I see you again, even on the horizon, I'll kill you, I swear," Garrett muttered in a low, dead voice. "Pray to God that I change my mind, otherwise I'll bury it right there." Mark was silent, breathing heavily. There was fear in his eyes. He knew Garrett was capable. Garrett slowly, threateningly, approached closely. "Fired, so that your spirit is not near my family. Am I clear?" "I see," Mark whispered. Garrett nodded, looking at this man he once considered his friend for a moment longer. Then he turned sharply and left, slamming the door so hard that the glass rattled. Molly sat in her car, covering her face with her hands on the steering wheel. Seeing her husband coming out, she jumped out, reeling from weakness. "Garrett," she began, holding out her hands. "Get in the pickup," he said harshly. "Now." She complied, knowing that any argument would only make the situation worse. They were silent the whole way home. Only when the house appeared ahead did Molly sob quietly. "I'm sorry." Garrett slammed on the brakes so hard that she was thrown forward, the seat belt cutting into her shoulder. He turned to her. "What? What did you say?" Molly burst into tears. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me." He looked at her for several seconds, shaking with a surge of emotions, anger, pain, disgust. Then he got out of the car, slamming the door loudly, and walked towards the house. She rushed after. Wait, talk to me, I beg you. As soon as the door slammed behind them, Molly tried to touch her husband's hand, but he jerked his hand away as if from fire. She cried, tears flowed down her cheeks. Harry, let me explain. Explain? He asked hoarsely, stopping in the living room. Do you want to tell me another fairy tale about just a joke, or did you come up with a new one? She sobbed even harder. I didn't mean to. It was all a mistake. Garrett exploded. A mistake? You purposefully slept with another man. How long did this last? Months? Years? No, no. She shook her head. Several months. Since January. Since January, he echoed, feeling how everything inside him was falling. So, while I, a fool, was working and trusting you. He closed his eyes, clasped his hands behind his head, trying not to scream. Molly stepped closer. I'm guilty, I know, unforgivably guilty. But I didn't want to leave you, really. Garrett smiled bitterly, looking at her with reddened eyes. Didn't want to quit? So why did you pack your suitcase on April 1st? Molly covered her face with her hands. I don't know. I was terrified. I was confused. Mark tried to persuade me to go to him, said that it would be better this way, that you were strong and would survive. Garrett shook his head. So the plan was real, to leave, not a prank. She dropped her hands and said in despair, at the last moment I couldn't. I realized that I couldn't do this to you. I loved you. I love. Her voice trembled. That's why I decided to pretend it was a joke. I thought everything would be okay. Will it be okay? He shouted. You made a laughingstock of me? And she continued to meet with him, no matter what. Molly took a step towards him, but he retreated. After that day, I tried to break up with him, honestly, she said pleadingly. I told him that I was staying with you and that everything was over between us. And how is it over if a week later you are kissing? Garrett muttered. Molly began to sob. He begged for a meeting, asked to give him a chance. I was confused. We met to finally decide everything. I was going to end it. Finally decide, in bed or on the sofa, he said venomously. She shook her head. No, there was nothing more than a kiss. Garrett chuckled incredulously. Certainly. How can I trust you? I know, she whispered, kneeling directly on the floor. I know I destroyed your trust. But I will do everything to get him back, do you hear? All. She crawled towards him on her knees, trying to hug his legs, but he retreated, shocked by her humiliated appearance. Stand up, don't you dare humiliate yourself, he said angrily. I hate to look at you. Molly sobbed and stood up, pressing her hands to her chest. If I'm disgusting to you, then. She was choking on tears. Then tell me what I can do to fix at least something. Garrett was silent. Before him stood the woman whom he loved more than life itself, and at the same time a foreign traitor, evoking pity and disgust. Like two personalities in one body, he closed his eyes. It was as if there was a struggle going on inside him, to throw the words about divorce in her face, to kick her to hell, or what? Forgive. Is it possible to forgive this? The minutes dragged on. Molly cried more quietly as she waited for the verdict. Finally, Garrett asked quietly, Why, Molly? What did I do wrong? She shook her head. Nothing. You were a good husband. Then why? He raised his voice, feeling the pain flare up again. Why are you doing this to me? Molly closed her eyes and swallowed. I felt lost. We've been married 10 years, Harry. Suddenly, I realized that my youth was leaving. That life had become mundane and boring. You're always at work. And then he appeared so attentive, funny. He listened to me like you haven't listened for a long time. She spoke hastily, as if justifying herself. This is not an excuse, I know, but it happened like this. At first we just talked, then we met for lunch. Then it went too far. I wanted to stop everything, honestly, but Mark insisted on this prank. He said that if you are so afraid of losing me, then maybe you will begin to appreciate me more, and if not, then I will leave with him. This is stupid. I should have refused him right away. Garrett looked at her, dumbfounded. So, in your opinion, it's my fault that I stopped listening. So you decided to treat it with cheating? And Mark, it turns out, also manipulated you? Molly began to sob. Probably. I was a fool. I got carried away. But it's all my fault, not him. He would have left without me if I hadn't agreed. She rushed about in her confessions, and Garrett was getting worse. His smiling, kind wife now appeared in the image of a capricious, dissatisfied traitor. Is that how he knew her? That's enough, he said tiredly, lowering his hand. I don't want to listen anymore. Molly came closer, looking into his eyes, full of tears. Will you? Will you leave me? Garrett noticed genuine terror in her voice. She was afraid of losing him, losing their established life, the one that, according to her, she was tired of. How ironic. He looked away. Don't know. Now I don't know anything. She timidly touched his hand. Please, give me a chance to fix everything. Even if it takes years, I will prove my loyalty to you. I'll do anything. Just don't go. Garrett was silent. He thought that if he said, it's over, and kicked her out then. What then? Will she rush to Mark? But he just threatened Mark. Or maybe he will start dividing up his property, his house, workshop. Yes, most likely, he will file for divorce and sue for his share. It turns out that after everything else, she will come for half of what he built. No, it was unbearable. She caused him such pain and must be punished. And not an easy divorce, after which, perhaps, he will also settle down with money and a new boyfriend. Something in Garrett's soul slammed shut, locked into an icy lock. He suddenly realized clearly there was no former love. She died. All that was left was emptiness and ashes, and a burning thirst to give what they deserved. After several long minutes, he said quietly, Fine. Molly held her breath. I won't leave. Bye, he added. She sobbed with relief. Thank you. Thank you, Harry. He raised his hand. But listen to me. It won't be the same between us as before. Perhaps never. I'll try. I'll try to forgive. But I can't promise anything. Molly nodded. I understand. I will try for the sake of both of us. I, too, will try, Garrett said, so that she did not catch the hidden meaning. That night they slept in separate rooms. Garrett went into the guest room, citing the fact that he needed space to be alone. Molly didn't mind, she was happy that he stayed. But lying on the creaky single bed in the guest room, Garrett did not sleep a wink. He looked at the ceiling and repeated one word to himself, retribution. Cold, inevitable, fair. She deserved every coming day of fear and uncertainty that he was going to give her. By morning, not a single tear remained in his soul, only a scorched desert, where love died long ago, and in its place sprouts of cruel determination sprouted. The morning after the second stormy showdown, everything was suspiciously calm in the Rivers house. Molly, tired from sobbing, slept on the marital bed, curled up like a child afraid of being abandoned. And Garrett got up at first light, feeling a strange clarity of thought and the purpose for which he was now waking up. There was a piece of paper on the kitchen table with points neatly written out. This early morning, having barely closed his eyes for a couple of hours, he got up and wrote down what had been running through his head all night. The list included consultation with a lawyer, business to get out from under attack, house find out about the sale, finances, separate accounts, cash, plan for April 1st. Garrett looked at these points while sipping his black coffee. For the first time in a long time, he felt not pain, but cold, rational calm. Like a mechanic who has discovered a serious engine failure, he mentally dissected the situation into details and found solutions. First of all, a lawyer. Although the thought of divorce was not voiced now, he understood. It was inevitable. And better prepare. Perhaps in court he will be able to leave Molly without a significant share of the property, given her betrayal. But he wasn't sure about the laws. Colorado seemed to be one of the states where adultery didn't directly affect the division of property. This means we need to act differently. While Molly slept, he quietly dressed and went to the morning meeting. He had a lawyer friend in Denver, Richard Lawson, who once helped each other in a client's insurance claims case. Richard agreed to receive him early before his main business began. In the lawyer's office, lined with dark wood, Garrett outlined the essence of the problem in a quiet, even voice, trying not to give away the storm inside. That's the situation, Rick. The divorce has not been filed yet, but I want to protect the business and my assets. Richard, a man of about 50 with piercing eyes, leaned back in his chair. I'm sorry, Garrett. Cheating is a difficult matter. But you're right, you need to think with your head. He polished a codex. In our state, property acquired during marriage is divided in half, regardless of the reasons for the divorce. So, formally, her betrayal does not deprive her of her rights to a share. That's what I was afraid of, Garrett nodded gloomily. However, the lawyer continued, there are ways to minimize losses. For example, prove that most of the assets were acquired before marriage or with personal funds. Or, he looked at Garrett over his glasses, withdraw the assets in advance. But here it is important not to break the law. Fictitious transactions can be challenged. Garrett squeezed the armrest. I don't care. There needs to be a way so she doesn't get anything. At all. Richard raised his eyebrows. You are determined. Well, I can offer the following. Firstly, if the business is registered in your name personally, you can sell it to a trusted person now, before filing for divorce. Then formally on the date of division, you will not have a business, you will only have money from the sale. They, in turn, can be hidden, for example, transferred to a trust or account for another person. Sell the business. Garrett drawled. What if I later want to return it? Well, if the deal is fictitious only on paper, then it's your agreement with your trusted representative. But this is a risk. The confidant must be crystal reliable. Garrett nodded, realizing that the only one he could trust right now was Mike. A friend is as loyal to him as a brother, and he wouldn't betray. Secondly, the house, the lawyer continued. If the house is registered in the name of both of you, you can't just sell it without her consent. But if it's only for you, you can try to sell it. The main thing is not at a reduced price for a loved one, otherwise they will get suspicious. Better market price to a third-party buyer. Again, hide the money somewhere. Well, or postpone the sale until the divorce, but I want to sell, Garrett snapped. The house is on me. I bought it before the wedding, however. We paid off the loan already during marriage. Then half of the increase in value can be considered jointly acquired, the lawyer warned. But if you sell it now, before the lawsuit, maybe it will work out. Garrett clenched his jaw. It was a risk, but he was willing to take it. And lastly, bills. Richard tapped his pen on the table. It is better to empty or close joint accounts before the paperwork. Transfer money to cash or offshore, it doesn't matter. It's already at the end. Got it, Garrett nodded. Are you sure you want it this way? The lawyer narrowed his eyes. Maybe we should try to negotiate peacefully and make changes to the marriage contract. There is no prenuptial agreement, Garrett muttered. Then only the steps described. But understand, these are gray methods. If she hires a lawyer and proves that you intentionally evaded the property, the court can return everything back. So we need to make sure she doesn't have to prove anything, Garrett said quietly, looking down. The lawyer studied his face for a while, then slowly asked, You didn't just start a divorce, did you? What are you up to, friend? Garrett smiled coldly at the edge of his lips. Nothing illegal, Rick. Don't worry. She will simply reap what she sows. Richard spread his hands. My job is to suggest options. The rest is up to you. Thank you, Garrett stood up, shaking the lawyer's hand. You helped me. Be careful, Richard admonished. Sometimes, wanting to punish, we destroy ourselves. But Garrett was already heading towards the exit, not listening to these words. He considered himself already a ruined man. All that remains is to punish the guilty. On the way back, while driving, he called Mike. Hello, Mike. We need to meet and talk confidentially. Of course, the friend immediately responded. I was just having breakfast at Bill's Cafe. Come over. I'll be there in 10 minutes. In a roadside diner with the smell of coffee and fried bacon, they took a far table. Mike noticed the gloomy expression on his friend's face, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. "How are you?" he asked quietly. "Fine," Garrett snapped. "Listen, I need your help." And complete secrecy. Mike nodded seriously. "Of course. Anything." "I decided not to divorce her right away," Garrett began, lowering his voice. "First, I want to secure the assets. You know, we have a house, a business. If we get divorced, she will sue half." Mike clenched his fists. "After what she did, abomination. How can I help? I want to transfer the business to someone. Temporarily, on paper." Mike frowned. "At me. On you. Or a company where you will be listed as the owner. Then, when it's all over, we'll return to how it was." Mike tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. "I don't mind. Only, she won't find out? No, if everything is quiet. Let's come up with an excuse. For example, reorganization for taxes." "Cunning." Mike smiled a little. "Okay, what about the house? I will most likely sell the house." "You also need to be quiet," Garrett said. "Maybe even sell it to you if you want to invest or through a figurehead. Then I'll buy it back." "Brother, I don't have enough money for your whole house," Mike sighed. "I know. It is possible through a loan. But these are unnecessary traces. I'd better find a buyer from the outside. Do you happen to know any investors?" Mike scratched his chin. "There is one type. He buys houses, repairs them, sells them. Marty Glover. I can make inquiries. He seems honest." "Point it." Garrett nodded. "Just without details. Say a friend wants to sell their house quickly at a low price." "Understood." Garrett touched Mike's hand. "Thank you. Can't do it without you." The friend shook his head. "I'm with you to the end, you know. It's just a shame that everything is leading to this. You loved her, after all." Garrett looked down into his cup of coffee. "Loved it. Already in the past tense." Mike sighed heavily. "Well, she'll have to answer." Garrett didn't answer, but Mike knew from the clenched jaw, yes, he would have to. Returning home around noon, Garrett found Molly in the kitchen. She was fussing around the stove, preparing dinner. Apparently, she wanted to make amends with her care. Hearing his steps, she turned around tensely. "Hello, you're early." "There's no work today," he answered briefly. "I decided to take a day off." Molly smiled nervously. "That's good. I almost had time to prepare dinner. Are you hungry?" He wasn't hungry, but nodded. They ate lunch in almost silence. Molly cast cautious glances, but the conversation did not go well. After eating, she was the first to speak. "Listen, maybe we should contact a family psychologist. I made inquiries here. They say it helps." Garrett put down his fork and looked at her for a long time. There was hope in her eyes. "I don't want psychologists," he snapped. Molly looked down. "I understand. I'm just trying to find a way." "The best way is time," he interrupted, "and your patience." He got up from the table and left the kitchen, making it clear that the conversation was over. Locking himself in the office they had made out of one of the bedrooms, Garrett took out paper and pen. Now, with the support of Mike and the advice of a lawyer, it was possible to describe the plan in more detail. He drew a rough graph. May, registration of business sale. Summer, searching for a buyer for the house, preparing documents. Autumn, completing the sale of the house. Winter, financial reshuffles, closing accounts. April 1st, leaving. For the first time, the exact date of his own departure appeared in his head, exactly a year after her joke. Garrett even smiled at the irony. She won't understand right away, but then she'll get it, he thought. April Fool's Day will be a day of reckoning. Quiet footsteps were heard from the corridor. The door opened slightly and Molly looked out. "Harry, is everything okay?" He hastily turned the sheet of paper down. "In order." She entered timidly. "Can I stay with you?" Garrett glanced at her. She was so unhappy, pathetic now that he could hardly contain his cold rage. But her appearance no longer evoked tenderness in him, only disgust. However, he forced himself to show a semblance of tired gentleness. "Sorry, I'm better alone now. A little later, okay?" Molly nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. Of course, I understand. She closed the door behind her. Garrett took a breath. He knew there was a long game ahead, and you need to learn to play a role, the role of a husband who is trying to forgive, in order not to frighten her, not to let her suspect that a thunderstorm is brewing behind the screen of reconciliation. He carefully hid his list in the table under a stack of old bills where Molly would definitely not reach. Then he stood at the window. Outside, the spring sun was shining, and streams of melted snow flowed along the side of the road. Life went on. But in Garrett's soul, everything was frozen, and until next April comes, in this icy calm, he will carry out his plan. May arrived quickly, bringing warm sunshine and green foliage to Colorado. Outwardly, the life of the Rivers family began to fall into a familiar rut. Garrett went to the workshop every day, Molly took care of the house, sometimes met with a friend or visited her mother in a neighboring town. To those around them, they looked like a married couple who had gone through a crisis and were trying to improve their relationship. But behind closed doors, their home was quiet and cold. Garrett was polite, correct, but distant. No outbursts of anger, no reproaches, nothing that would betray his resentment. At first, Molly was happy about this, thinking that her husband was gradually thawing. She didn't know what was really hiding behind his calmness. In mid-May, a staff meeting was held in the workshop. Garrett announced that in order to optimize taxes and development, the company would be reorganized. Mike would officially become the owner as managing director, and Garrett himself would step away from management, remaining the chief mechanic. The mechanics looked at each other. The news was strange, but since the boss decided so, it means he knows better. Molly was not present at the meeting, and in general, after the affair with the betrayal, she stopped interfering in the affairs of the workshop. She felt that she had lost the moral right to advise her husband in his work. The documents were completed quickly. Lawyer Richard, under the surprised gaze of a notary, certified the purchase and sale agreement. Formally, Mike acquired the Rocky Auto Repair Shop for a nominal fee. The money, several $1,000s, was transferred through the account only for appearances. Garrett then simply returned these funds to Mike with another payment disguised as a bonus payment. On paper, the business now belonged to Mike O'Brien. After signing, she and Mike locked themselves in the workshop office. Garrett looked for a long time at the wall where a photograph once hung, he and Molly against the backdrop of the new service building, happy, full of hope. Now the frame was empty. He removed the photograph after the betrayal. "How do you feel, boss?" Garrett asked with a wry smile. Mike shrugged. "It's all strange. It's like I'm taking your child away from you." "This is temporary," Garrett answered quietly. "Just a formality." Mike nodded. "I understand everything. Still, I hope the game is worth the candle." Garrett clenched his fist, but held back his emotion. "It's worth it, Mike. You saw what she was ready for." The friend didn't answer. He just sighed heavily. He felt sorry for Garrett. He had noticeably faded away over these months, although he tried to hold on. And when a person is consumed by the thirst for retribution, it also eats away from the inside. But Mike knew it was useless to dissuade. In the meantime, Molly really hoped for gradual improvement. At the beginning of June, she decided to propose. "Let's go somewhere for the weekend. Just you and me. Let's try to distract ourselves, spend time together." She timidly expected a refusal, but Garrett suddenly said, "Maybe. You need to choose a time when work will be quieter." Molly beamed. "Is it true? Maybe in July." "We'll see," he answered evasively. He took her offer as a good opportunity. If she was planning a trip together, he could use the moment of her absence for his business. However, there were no specifics yet. At the end of June, Molly decided to visit her parents, who lived a couple of hours away, and spend a few days with them. She asked if Garrett would mind. He just shrugged. "Of course, go. It's good for you to see each other." He didn't care as long as she wasn't left unattended for too long. But a couple of days is normal, and at the same time, he has freedom of action. When Molly went to her parents, Garrett took up the issue at home. Through Mike, he contacted a real estate investor, Martin Glover. He was famous for buying houses for renovation and resale. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday, when Molly was away. Martin turned out to be a stocky man of about 40 with a sharp gaze. They walked around the house, and he immediately understood. Nice house. Why are you selling so suddenly and quietly if it's not a secret? Family circumstances, Garrett answered dryly. We need money. I don't want to make noise and disturb the neighbors again. Martin shrugged. I'm not against quick deals, but the price will be slightly lower than the market for urgency. Garrett expected this. Suggest. They sat down on the veranda and Martin announced the amount. It was 20% lower than the house could cost through an official agency. But Garrett, almost without haggling, agreed. Let's do this, said Martin. I'm drawing up a preliminary agreement now, giving a deposit. We will close the deal in the fall, say October, so that I can prepare my finances. October, okay. The main thing is that everything is decided before winter. Okay, Garrett extended his hand and they shook hands. After the investor left, Garrett looked around his property, a cozy courtyard, a porch where he and Molly drank coffee in the morning for so many years. Soon it will no longer belong to them. Surprisingly, he felt no regret, only a slight bitterness that all dreams of a family nest had collapsed. Well, so be it. Molly returned 3 days later, full of cautious optimism. Her mother gave her instructions to be patient and take care of the marriage. Molly tried not to ask Garrett too many questions for fear of causing irritation again. She noticed that her husband was busy with something he called a lot. Sometimes he locked himself in his room with papers. But he explained briefly, tax matters or routine bureaucracy. Previously, she helped him with documents, but now she stayed away. She knew that her initiative was not welcome. One July evening, when the heat had subsided and the sun was setting behind the mountains, they were sitting in the backyard. Molly served a small dinner outdoors, fried chicken, salad, cold lemonade. She tried to revive at least a shadow of the former intimacy between them. Do you remember how we celebrated a housewarming party here? She asked quietly, looking up at the pale pink sky. Garrett took a sip of lemonade. I remember. There were so many people, laughter, music. We then danced right on the grass. She smiled with just her lips, afraid to meet the coldness in his eyes. Garrett looked at the sight as if he were seeing these ghosts of the past again. Yes, it was a good day. Molly became bolder. I believe we will still have good days, if you can forgive me completely. He was silent. She continued. I read a book about relationships. It said that if people survive this and stay together, their bond can become even stronger. Garrett put down his glass. Maybe. Molly moved a little closer and put her hand on his arm. I'm grateful to you for the chance. You are incredibly kind to me, no matter what. Garrett looked at her hand on his. Once this touch caused warmth, now almost nothing. But he did not withdraw his hand. He allowed her this little thing. I just do what I think is right, he answered quietly. Molly squeezed his fingers. I love you. He nodded, neither confirming nor denying. I'll go get the dishes, he said softly after a pause and stood up, carefully releasing his palm. In the kitchen, clattering plates, Garrett tried to stop shaking. Her words of love made him feel empty inside. And yet this scene sunset, she is nearby, as before stirred something painful. He almost succumbed to weakness and did not say, and I you. But that would be a lie. There was no more love, there was only a task. July was approaching. Molly asked again about the promised vacation together. Garrett thought and suggested, let's go to the lake for the weekend in August. Is it true? Her eyes lit up. Oh, Harry, this will be wonderful. She immediately started planning and found a nice guest house near Lake Granby. Garrett confirmed the booking as soon as she showed it to him. Everything had to look believable. Deep down, he didn't care where to go or what to do, but this step supported the illusion of rapprochement. August arrived, and they actually spent 2 days at the picturesque lake. Molly tried to act at ease and not put pressure on her husband. They walked along the shore, even talked about extraneous things about nature, about neighbors, about the news. In rare moments, Garrett found himself almost enjoying the company of his wife, accustomed to it for so many years. She could still make him laugh with a funny memory or a children's song that she hummed while picking berries along the path. But as soon as he relaxed even a little, his memory returned to the picture. Molly and Mark entwined in a kiss. Then the smile faded from his face. On the last evening at the lake, Molly decided to go into his shower as he washed himself after a hot day. This was her first bold step towards intimacy since everything collapsed. She entered the bathroom, timidly threw away her robe. Steam enveloped her figure. Garrett froze under the spray of water when he heard movement behind the curtain. She pushed it aside and stepped towards him, naked, vulnerable. "Can I come to you?" she whispered. He looked at her body, familiar down to the smallest mole, and at the same time now alien, desecrated by the memory of another. A wave of contradictions rose in my chest. He didn't answer, but he didn't send her away either. Molly approached, putting her face under the warm streams, and touched his chest with her palm, moving it down. Her touch was gentle, pleading. Garrett closed his eyes. He let her cuddle up to him in the shower and felt her body trembling with excitement. She kissed his lips for the first time in months. He didn't answer at first, but she kissed again and again, and finally he answered. Not out of desire, rather, out of the inertia of an old habit. For several minutes they lost themselves in this unity, dissolving in the sound of water and the warmth of naked skin. However, when Molly fell asleep in his arms later that night, happy for the first time after a long breakup, Garrett lay with his eyes open, looking at the ceiling. Instead of satisfaction, he felt disgust with himself. It seemed to him as if he had betrayed his own hatred, had given in to slack, allowed her to think that everything was getting better. Although, maybe that's how it should be, let him believe. But why then is it so lousy at heart? He carefully got out from under her hand, got dressed, and went out onto the porch of the house. The night was quiet, the moonlit path was spreading across the lake. Garrett ran his hand over his face. Molly's laughter today came to mind, her joy when he hugged her on the path, and then her lies, her betrayal. He didn't notice how he clenched his fists until it hurt. No, softness is inappropriate. She must pay in full, and he will finish what he started. Just before leaving, when they were packing their things, Molly smiled. "Thank you for this weekend. I felt alive again." Garrett just nodded. The ride back was more difficult. Molly tried to take his hand, but he kept his hands on the steering wheel. After yesterday's intimacy, he retreated into himself again, and she was at a loss had she really rushed and scared him. But he remained silent. Upon returning to the city, autumn awaited them a time of change. Garrett had to finalize the deal on the house. Molly, suspecting nothing, returned to her routine, working on her relationship, her husband's occasional smiles, which she took as progress, and hoping that the worst was behind her. Autumn has brought cool temperatures and golden colors to the aspen trees in Colorado. In early October, Garrett completed the sale of the house. He found an excuse to go to Denver, supposedly for spare parts, and he went to the office of the title company, where Martin Glover was already waiting for him with documents. Molly didn't know anything, and that day she went to help a friend with preparations for her children's birthday, so she didn't ask too many questions. As Garrett signed the deed of sale, he felt a strange sense of detachment. The pen wrote his name in the seller column, and with each stroke he seemed to cross out a decade of marriage. The house they built and furnished together now belonged to someone else. "Well, congratulations on the sale," Martin shook his hand after completing the formalities. "As agreed, you can stay in the house until spring. We included rent until March in the conditions." "Thank you," Garrett answered briefly. This was a key part of the plan. He insisted on the clause that he would rent the house from the new owner for another 6 months, motivated by the need to find housing and move outside of winter. Glover easily agreed because he was in no hurry to occupy the house he still planned to renovate and resell. Garrett distributed the money received from the sale instantly. Part of it went to a closed trust account, registered through the same Richard Lawson. Part was transferred to the account of a new company registered by a lawyer in the name of a dummy. Only a small amount, for show, remained in Garrett's personal accounts. If anyone looked at their bank statements, it looked like the money was spent on investing in the business and paying off debts. When he returned home that evening, he found Molly sorting mail. She greeted him joyfully. "Hello, how did you go?" "Successfully," he nodded, taking off his shoes. December closed the path of golden autumn, bringing the first real snowfalls and scorching winds blowing from the mountain ranges to Colorado. In the evenings, frost lashed the windows, and the river's house seemed to sink even deeper into external and internal numbness. Since Garrett sold the house and actually changed the owner of the workshop, his coldness towards his wife became almost imperceptible because he did not allow himself even those few harsh words that had broken out earlier. He clearly tried to remain even more distant and indifferent, just enough for Molly to feel. There was a wall between them, but there were no obvious conflicts, and even less loud quarrels. Molly herself tried to return a bit of warmth to their relationship. Back in the fall, she was vaguely glad that Garrett agreed to go with her to Lake Granby. After that joint trip, she was in an almost euphoric state, deciding that perhaps her husband was seriously forgiving her. But she soon realized, although Garrett allowed intimacy that night and even showed some signs of attention, a week later he closed himself off again. It was as if they took a couple of steps towards us and immediately returned to their previous distant positions. At the beginning of December, with Christmas approaching, Molly did not give up trying to warm up the atmosphere in the house. Christmas decorations appeared on the mantelpiece, sprigs of holly, fir cones, silver tinsel. Molly tried to make special foods that Garrett used to love: cinnamon spice cake, honey muffins, homemade bagels in the morning. It seemed to her that the taste of familiar baked goods and the comfort of holiday lights could melt the ice a little. But Garrett reacted with restraint. He sat down at the table, ate or drank coffee, sometimes mechanically praising her efforts, but his smile was forced. The look remained detached, and this polite coldness hurt Molly much more than any outburst of anger. She understood he still had not forgiven. In the evenings, they sat in the living room with various books, rarely looking up at each other, and at night, even though they now slept in the same bedroom, silence lay between them. Molly tried to gently hug him a couple of times and lean her shoulder against him, but Garrett avoided or tensed up sharply as if touching a stranger. In order not to go crazy from the pricks of conscience, Molly signed up for an online consultation with a psychologist. The doctor told her that in the case of severe betrayal, especially when both want to save the family, long-term therapy and mutual work on trust will be required. Molly felt that her readiness alone was not enough. Garrett did not speak out loud about the divorce or make open reproaches, but it was precisely this silence that frightened her to the point of trembling. Several times Molly hinted that it would be a good idea to go to a marriage counselor together. She even posted little motivational notes around the house: "I love you," "We will overcome anything," and so on. But Garrett only nodded, not agreeing to joint visits to a psychologist. "Not ready yet," he repeated, and Molly was forced to retreat. By mid-December, the weather finally turned the roads into icy tracks, and more clients appeared at the Rocky Auto Workshop wanting to change winter tires, oil, and inspect the chassis before the snow. Despite the fact that Mike was now considered the official owner of the business, nothing had changed for the team. Out of habit, they addressed Garrett as the boss. Mike himself respected order, did not force the situation, only being listed as the owner on paper and periodically signing invoices. There were no conflicts within the company, everything went smoothly and professionally. No one suspected what was hidden behind the external prosperity. Garrett was anticipating the continuation of his revenge and was secretly biding his time. At this time, he began to put the finishing touches to his plan, closing the joint accounts. More precisely, he transferred the balances from them into cash, so that by the end of the month, the accounts would have pitiful crumbs. Molly once also had access to these accounts, but after the prank and the break with the accounting department, she hardly looked at the bank statements. Perhaps she was too wrapped up in her guilt or was afraid to get involved in her husband's financial affairs for fear of causing discontent. And Garrett took advantage of this passivity, regularly transferred funds, froze them in various anonymous trusts, got rid of any information that could make Molly understand that they were no longer rich as before. Sometimes he looked at his reflection in the mirror and asked himself, "Am I doing the right thing? Am I going too far?" Images from the past appeared before my eyes. Molly, smiling and cheerful when they were just starting to meet. Then she seemed like an open book to him, no secrets, no double meanings, and yet she betrayed. She betrayed cruelly, cynically, and to believe her now, to forgive her, to let her into her heart again, it seemed beyond Garrett's strength. And even though he didn't show it outwardly, a determination swelled inside him to complete his plan, to leave her empty-handed on the day when she herself played a joke on him a year ago. Christmas Eve was surprisingly calm for the Rivers family. Molly went to her mother for one day, helped with shopping and decorating the house, and returned in the evening. Garrett was sitting in the living room by the fireplace, holding a book in his hands, but he had trouble reading. His thoughts were running wild. Molly offered, with a slight smile, to cook them something festive, and he nodded without much enthusiasm. There was an awkward politeness at dinner. They exchanged modest gifts. Molly gave her husband a new leather jacket, and Garrett gave her a set of expensive perfumes, although he chose them based more on the recommendations of the salesman than on his knowledge of his wife's tastes. When the first stars of the Christmas evening were already scattering outside the window, Molly timidly touched his hand across the table and whispered, "I know it's too early to talk about final reconciliation, but Harry, I want you to know, I will never stop loving you. Thank you for not abandoning me and giving me a chance." Garrett looked at her eyes, shining from tears and the reflection of the candles on the table. He did not find an answer in his soul. He just squeezed out, "I'll try to appreciate it. Thank you for dinner." Having said this, he rose from the table and, citing fatigue, went upstairs alone with his thoughts. Molly remained sitting in the semi-darkness, clutching her fork in her hands and feeling that all her efforts were running into a cold glass wall. She didn't understand. Maybe this was his way of being sad and recovering from a blow, or is he planning something completely different? This is how the last days of December passed, in an atmosphere of hidden anxiety and seeming calm. Molly began planning a trip for the spring, suggesting to Garrett, "Let's go to the south of the state in April. It will already be warm there." So as not to arouse her suspicion, he nodded vaguely. "Maybe. We'll see." It seemed to her that at least he did not reject her ideas, and with this she clung to grains of hope. Every evening, Garrett reformatted the balances of money transfers, carefully wrote down passwords and codes for new accounts that he opened abroad in a notebook. Taught by lawyer Richard, he chose the most intricate schemes so that, if Molly or her potential lawyers wanted, it would be almost impossible to find and return this money. Shortly before New Year's Eve, he closed the last of the joint accounts, transferring a symbolic amount of a couple of $100 to a separate card, which lay in a drawer in the kitchen. It was this map that remained the official total score. If Molly suddenly went to look at the balance sheet, she would see, yes, there are funds there, albeit not much. She would not have suspected that in fact tens of thousands had been stored there before. Garrett acted carefully, leaving no traces or raising further questions. The December twilight was falling quickly. Snowstorms paralyzed the roads more than once during the week, but Christmas and the coming New Year still brought the city a feeling of celebration. Garlands were burning everywhere, soft light fell from the windows. Sometimes, looking at the bright decoration of the neighboring houses, Garrett asked himself, why is there darkness in his soul when everyone around him is trying to be happy? The answer had long been clear. His joy died when he learned about the betrayal. And now, in the coming January, he was about to move on to the next stage, a step that would affect not only Molly, but also Mark. On the last night of the year, as the clock struck midnight, Molly quietly made a toast to forgiveness and love, and Garrett, looking down into his glass of champagne, just nodded. The scent of pine needles hung in the air from the small Christmas tree in the corner of the living room, and the garlands flickered. It seemed that this house had seen better days. Once upon a time at Christmas, they had guests, noise, and the exchange of gifts. Now there is silence, awkward as between neighbors, not spouses. And yet Molly came up to him, hugged him, and, timidly reaching out, kissed him on the cheek. Garrett didn't pull away, but he didn't kiss back either. This is how they celebrated the new year January 1st, which was supposed to be a month of big changes. January in the Colorado mountains began with bitter frosts, and in Garrett's soul with burning determination. He waited a few days after the holidays, biding his time to contact Mark Helton. He had almost disappeared from their social circle. After Garrett kicked him out of the workshop and threatened him with violence, Mark moved out of harm's way to a rented apartment on the other side of the town. He was also not in the accounting office where he had previously worked. It seems that he had lost trust there too. But Garrett kept Mark's phone number, and then one evening I called him. Mark answered in a frightened voice, recognizing the number. "Hello?" "Hi," Garrett said coldly. "We need to meet." "Harry, look, I don't want any problems," Mark muttered. "I left. I won't touch you anymore." "Meet me today at the old hangar on the outskirts, near Highway 14, Garrett interrupted, "or I'll come to your house. Decide for yourself which is worse." Mark was silent for a few agonizing seconds and then squeezed out. "Fine. At what time?" "At 9 o'clock in the evening." Garrett hung up. His heart was pounding, but he suppressed any hesitation, remembering the very scenes when Molly and Mark kissed. "Today I'll show him what it means to joke with me," he thought, putting on a warm leather jacket and pulling on a knitted hat. In the evening, he told Molly that he needed to go to the workshop to check one car and left. The old hangar in question had long stood abandoned on the edge of the town. There were only rare lights around, and the hangar itself was illuminated by a dim lantern near a rickety fence. By 9 in the evening, the sky was clouded with snow clouds, from which prickly snow fell hoarsely. Garrett's pickup was parked to the side. He turned off the headlights and looked out for the silhouette of another car. A little further away, it looked like Mark had already arrived. Garrett walked out, his feet sank into the snow. Coming closer, he saw the white face of Mark, who was standing near the hood and shivering from cold or fear. "Harry, did you come alone?" Mark asked, looking around nervously. "Of course, one," Garrett replied evenly. "You have nothing to be afraid of if you have a drop of brains." He came almost close and looked at Mark in the light of the flickering lantern. He looked exhausted, bags under his eyes, sunken cheeks. Was there guilt and remorse or just fear? It's hard to say. "What do you want?" Mark whispered, trying to stay calm, but his voice showed trembling. "Do you know that, in addition to moral damage, your actions may have legal consequences?" Garrett began, without wasting time on prefaces. "I have evidence of your scam with Molly, including statements, checks, testimonies of people that you used your official position. Do you want a summons for fraud and professional ethics?" "What kind of fraud?" Mark was indignant. "Yes, I made a mistake. There was an affair, but—" "You received money as an accountant," Garrett said coldly, "used the trust of your employer, developed a personal relationship with the wife of the company owner, turned a blind eye to dubious write-offs." In fact, Garrett did not have an ironclad fraud, but in court he could pretend that Mark was helping Molly withdraw money. For a professional accountant, this would already be a big blemish in his career, and if something additional is revealed, for example, deliberate falsification of reports. Mark turned pale. No, I didn't do anything like that. Maybe there were mistakes, but I have enough leverage." Garrett did not let him finish. "So listen to my ultimatum. You're disappearing from Colorado, okay? Not just from the town, from the state in general. And never again come close to me, to Molly, to our company. Change your number and leave. Otherwise, I will launch all the mechanisms and you will receive them in full." Sweat appeared on Mark's forehead. He bit his lip, looking from Garrett's gloomy face to his car, as if searching for a way to escape. But I understood. Now it is useless. "When?" he asked dully. "Until the end of February," Garrett snapped. "By then you should leave and not leave any clue. You can either go to California or Nebraska, I don't care. The main thing is to be like a ghost." "And Molly," Mark said suddenly in a trembling voice, "she knows that's what you decided?" Garrett's eyes sparkled. Molly, I'm sure she won't even remember you when I'm done with her, but it's none of your business anymore. Mark nodded, trying to stop trembling. Got it. I need time to pack my things and find a job. Okay, I'll leave by the end of February. Garrett narrowed his eyes. Remember, if you try to play deception, communicate with her or other people, I will not back down. If you don't want any trouble, do as I said. Mark swallowed hard and lowered his head. That's it, get out, Garrett said shortly. They went to their cars without shaking hands or saying another word. Mark started the engine and quickly drove away, and Garrett stood still for a minute, clenching his fists in his jacket pockets, looking after the red lights of the car. Snow pricked my face. He felt a painful but bittersweet satisfaction in his chest. The first stage of the deal had been completed. Now this coward will definitely leave, otherwise he will get a lot of problems. Perfect, Garrett thought. Molly is also too busy feeling guilty to seek a meeting with him. When he returned home around midnight, Molly was already asleep. He quietly undressed and looked into the bedroom. She was lying, covered with a blanket almost over her head. The light of the night lamp caught her worried face. Even in sleep it seemed tense, as if she was having disturbing dreams. Garrett closed the door and walked into the empty guest room. He could not fall asleep for a long time, replaying his recent conversation with Mark in his head. Everything is going according to plan, he said to himself. All that remains is to bring the matter to the end. The next morning, he saw Molly in the kitchen, making toast. She looked tired, but when she noticed him, she tried to smile. Good morning. How are you doing? Nothing special, he responded, pouring coffee. I didn't sleep well. Do you want me to make scrambled eggs? She suggested quietly, as if afraid to scare him. You can, Garrett agreed indifferently. While she was busy at the stove, he looked at her from behind the edge of the mug. In the past, he would have come up, hugged me from behind, kissed me on the neck. But all these gestures of affection died in him. Molly felt it in the cold gaze, but did not know how to return the intimacy. That day, Garrett formally told her that he needed to go to Denver for workshop business. What he really wanted to do was meet with a lawyer to iron out a couple of legal details about a potential lawsuit against Mark. Molly didn't mind. She turned around only once, asking, Maybe I should go with you. I would also go to the shopping center and buy something for the house. I'm more comfortable alone, Garrett answered dryly. I won't be long. She sighed and stepped back. And so it was now in almost everything. Any of her attempts to get closer were met with a cold excuse. However, Molly tried not to give up, because a few weeks ago they managed to spend at least one time together outside the house. So there is a chance, she thought. But January dragged on, snow covered the streets, and Garrett became increasingly focused on his mysterious business. In the rare moments when they talked about the future, Molly noticed a strange duality in his words. He could say, There will be a lot of work in the workshop in the spring. We will change tires for clients. But at the same time, he avoided mentioning our house or our life, as if he didn't plan to stay here long. She began to worry, making guesses. What if he was going to move, leaving her? What if he really gets divorced, but secretly? One night, overcoming her fear, Molly decided to look at her husband's documents in his office. But the closet where the folders of papers used to be was almost empty, just a couple of bills from the workshop. Remembering Garrett's old habit of locking the most important papers in the safe, Molly checked the safe. There were only a few contracts for car repairs, and those were dated back to last spring. There was no mention of bank accounts. Maybe he really reorganized everything, she thought, dropping a heavy stone from her heart. Perhaps he is trying to optimize taxes or credit. And yet, the premonition haunted her because a year ago, when they were closer, she knew about every movement of funds. Now he didn't let her in on the slightest detail. So January passed. By the end of the month, the snowstorms intensified, and the city was covered in frequent snowstorms. And thoughts about the next step were already brewing in Garrett's head. He knew Molly felt something, but he didn't want her to suspect the true extent of his plan yet. But Mark was now definitely under threat. He was ordered to leave until the end of February. Everything is going according to schedule, Garrett concluded, making another note in his secret notebook. In the first days of February, a humid wind blew from the east in Colorado. The frost began to gradually recede, although snow still covered the ground. Gray clouds often covered the sky, giving the earth either rain or snow pellets. For many in the state, February was a time when winter fatigue was already felt, but spring seemed still far away. For Garrett, February became a key month in implementing the plan. He had already completed the main legal and financial maneuvers. The business did not formally belong to him, nor did the house. Joint accounts are cleared to zero, cash and assets are distributed among secret caches. All that remained was to carefully bring the idea of retribution to its logical conclusion. Molly, not knowing any of this, continued to hope for improvement. At the end of January, they suddenly went to dinner together at a small restaurant. The initiator, to her surprise, was Garrett himself. Internally, he did this deliberately to enhance her feeling that the ice had broken. At dinner, they talked about some abstract things. They recalled carefree trips 2 years ago and discussed a film they had watched on TV. Molly tried not to remember the past so as not to evoke painful associations in it. She smiled and felt a warm fire arise in her soul. Is there really hope? In reality, Garrett was simply playing a role. He saw Molly's eyes light up when he made small gestures of attention to her, passing the sauce, lightly touching her fingers, asking if she wanted dessert. He was disgusted inside, but he managed to suppress this disgust for the sake of the main goal. At night, they returned home, and Molly timidly suggested, "Maybe we should go upstairs. Shall we drink tea together before bed?" "Come on," he nodded. They sat in the bedroom, drank herbal tea, and she talked about spring. Molly suggested, "I was thinking, maybe we'll go somewhere in April. Remember you talked about a trip to the south of the state? There is a spa resort there, so we could relax." Garrett looked down. "Yes, you can. I'll think about the dates." She smiled, hugging him slightly. Garrett allowed her to do this, even pretended to hold her close to him, and Molly felt a momentary happiness as if he had actually taken her back. Fool, Garrett mentally cursed himself, looking at her trusting eyes. Do you really think that you can erase that nightmare with one dinner? However, he did not utter a word. So in February, Garrett increasingly thawed out in public to have dinner somewhere, go to the grocery store together, even take a couple of walks in the snow-covered park. Molly took this as a sign of the gradual restoration of their family. She could not even imagine that just a couple of months ago the house actually came into the possession of Martin Glover, and Garrett himself was already working out the details of her dismissal from all matters. Formally, Molly was still listed as an accountant's assistant within the workshop. She once helped with general paperwork and wrote out invoices to clients. After the scandal with Mark, she stopped going there, but Garrett kept her on the staff on paper under the pretext that, let it be so as not to wash dirty linen. However, at the end of February, he decided to sign an order to liquidate the position. Mike, to whom Garrett explained everything, completed the formalities so that Molly would lose the last touch of the business. The orders and documents were ready and were in Mike's safe. All that remained was to choose the moment when Garrett would notify her that the position was closed. Meanwhile, the time has come to fulfill the ultimatum to Mark. In mid-February, Garrett learned from mutual acquaintances that Mark had gone to his relatives in New Mexico, removing things and selling inexpensive furniture. Garrett called Mark's old number back, and he didn't answer. Only a couple of hours later, I received a text message. "I've left, just as you wanted. Don't look for me." Garrett smiled wryly, erasing the message. Okay, at least one point is resolved. The next day, he made a special trip to Denver to meet with lawyer Richard Lawson and show that Mark had complied with the conditions. Richard raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "Well, now this man is unlikely to interfere. Planning the final stage with your wife?" "Yes," Garrett answered shortly. "I think in April, exactly on the anniversary of her April Fool's prank." Richard sighed, looking at the client's angry face. "I'm sorry it's like this, but I hope you realize that you are leaving her without a penny. She abandoned me to my fate a year ago," Garrett recalled. "Let him feel the same." The lawyer spread his hands. "Okay, legally, you have closed all the loopholes. If she hires a lawyer, well, her chances are slim, considering you don't have any property to your name." "Exactly," Garrett agreed grimly. "Let him not think of shouting about injustice later." After signing several papers, Garrett left. For the remaining weeks of February, he continued to play the caring husband. He called Molly to the skating rink where they had once skated in their youth and offered to organize a home screening of old comedies. Molly blossomed before our eyes. She even shared with a friend over the phone that she and Garrett were getting better and were going on a romantic trip in April. Secretly, however, she felt a hint of concern. Garrett was too smooth. There was no real passion, no deep conversations about the past. He just seemed to pretend that everything had been forgotten. But Molly grabbed this silence as salvation, repeating to herself, "If he doesn't want to talk about the past, then he doesn't want to stir up the pain. So be it, the main thing is that we are together." She wrote in her diary, "I dreamed of a second chance. Looks like he gave it to me. I have to be a better wife so I don't disappoint him again." And she really tried. She kept the house clean, prepared dinners, and did not make any complaints. Garrett was outwardly calmer than before, and Molly thought this was a success. So the end of February came unnoticed. Molly suggested having something of a mini holiday, because they had a symbolic date on March 2nd, the day Garrett first took her to his then small auto repair shop. Years ago, they had joked that it was like being initiated into a special area of his life. Now Molly hoped that by celebrating this date together, they would bring some kind of conclusion to reconciliation. "Sounds nice," Garrett replied curtly when she mentioned a mini holiday. In fact, he already knew that the results would be much grander and would happen a little later, in April, when he would finally disappear from her life, leaving an empty house and empty accounts. But for now, he continued to play the role of a patient, somewhat withdrawn, but helpful husband. In the last days of February, he put his keys in order, a set of keys for the house, for the workshop, for the guest room on Lake Granby. But he conceived a different scenario. Molly had no idea how insidious her own April 1st would be. The last days of February smoothly flowed into March, and Colorado greeted the new month with a prickly wind and the first timid hints of a spring thaw. The snow no longer lay in a solid shell. In some places, wet asphalt could be seen on the roads, and the air smelled of melt water and pine needles exposed from under the snow. For many residents of the state, March meant the imminent arrival of spring. The days became longer, the birds began to chirp in the morning. But there was a special tension in the Rivers household. Garrett felt that the end of his long-term plan was near. All that remained was to finalize a few details, waiting for April 1st, the date that last year marked the beginning of his collapse and was now supposed to be the day of reckoning. Molly, on the contrary, perceived the onset of March as a symbol of some kind of degeneration in their relationship. She repeatedly hinted that spring is an ideal time of renewal, a chance to forget all the bad things and move on with life. She was especially inspired by the fact that Garrett had behaved relatively calmly in recent weeks and did not shy away from general walks. Often on weekends they, albeit not too emotionally, still went to the same supermarket together. Sometimes Garrett even voluntarily agreed to sit with her in a cozy cafe over a cup of coffee. Molly considered these actions a sign of his final forgiveness, although she noticed that the deep warmth and passion that was before was not yet there. But she deluded herself into thinking that everything will come in time. At the beginning of March, there was a short but sudden snowfall. Literally overnight, the city was swept away again, and by lunchtime, the snow turned to rain, turning the streets into an icy mess. Molly woke up a little later than usual, looked out the window, and saw a dank gray picture. For some reason, my soul became uneasy. She could not find Garrett in the house, and only then saw that he was in the workshop. Apparently, he had gone out to check the tools or fix something. When Molly came down, he was already back, brushing his jacket from melted drops. "Good morning," she said, taking a towel to help him dry his wet shoulders. "Hi," Garrett replied briefly, accepting her help. There was some weariness in his voice, as if he hadn't slept half the night. "I didn't find you right away. What did you do early in the morning?" "Yes, so. I checked if everything was in order with my tools," he shrugged, carefully avoiding her gaze. "Otherwise, it suddenly gets warmer, and we'll have to clean things up a little and throw away the old things." Molly smiled. "Great, we can watch it together later if you need my help." But Garrett only politely refused. "No, don't worry. I'll figure it out myself." In fact, he was checking whether everything was hidden securely and whether there were any random papers lying around that could reveal his fraud with money. In his back closet, there was a folder with all copies of contracts for the sale of the house, company documents, transfers to trusts. He kept most of it with the lawyer, but some was still included here in case of unforeseen circumstances. While Molly slept, Garrett carefully hid the folder in a niche in the wall that he had equipped in his youth. He didn't want to take risks at the very last moment, because one casual glance and Molly could have guessed that the house had not belonged to them for a long time. But judging by the way she was smiling happily now, she had no suspicions. 2 days later, when the porridge on the roads had dried up slightly and the temperature was hovering around zero, Garrett announced some unexpected news to Molly. "I want to give you a gift. Go to the place where we vacationed at the very beginning of our acquaintance. Do you remember those lands?" He deliberately said these words with a hint of a romantic surprise following the plan, to make her feel that he was trying to improve the relationship and was ready to relive the atmosphere of their best memories. Molly answered in a voice choking with joy. "God, Harry, of course I remember. Do you mean that lake in the mountains where we spent the night with a tent? Or our first motel near the canyon?" Garrett grinned, feigning a slight dreaminess. "Both places were special, weren't they? But this time, I think, we'll choose a more comfortable option, maybe rent a house near our old campsite for both comfort and memories." "It's my pleasure," Molly exclaimed. Her eyes filled with tears because this sounded like a real confirmation that her husband wanted to return to his former intimacy. "When do you want to go?" "At the very end of March, or exactly on April 1st, he answered, estimating the date. "It won't be so cold there will be less snow. I have a lot to do in the workshop, but I hope I can find a couple of days." "Oh, Harry," she rushed to hug him, pressing her cheek to his shoulder. "Thank you. This is so touching. I'll be happy to go. I have long dreamed of a joint outing." He patted her hand, allowing her to embrace, although inside he felt only cold determination. Great, let him rejoice, thought Garrett. The greater the shock will be when she wakes up on April 1st to an empty house. After this conversation, Molly began to prepare with inspiration. She leafed through old photo albums, trying to remember the details of their first trip many years ago. In one photo, the two of them, still young, tired but happy, around a tent, smoke from a fire. Molly remembered how calm and protected she felt next to Garrett, and how funny he was when he tried to light a fire with damp branches. Under these memories, her heart sank. Can it be that we have lost all this forever? No, since he decided to go with me, it means he loves. Or at least wants to love, she thought, clinging to hope. Meanwhile, Garrett was making final preparations. In mid-March, he secretly contacted Martin Glover, the buyer of their house, and warned that he planned to break the lease ahead of schedule. He reminded that, according to the additional agreement, he could move out suddenly, and the house would become the property of Glover. Martin did not mind because he still had to renovate, which he wanted to start as soon as the house is vacant. "Okay," Glover said on the phone. "Let me know the exact date, and I'll come with the workers to take over the premises and change the locks." "Of course," Garrett replied, looking out the window at the dirty icicles hanging from the ledge. "I think it will be at the very beginning of April." "Okay, I'll be in touch." Garrett hung up, blinking as if shaking off a stupor. "One more step," he noted. "All that remains is to collect things, but do it unnoticed by Molly." He understood that it would not be possible to escape completely unnoticed, but he could prepare it so that on the night before April 1st, most of his personal belongings would already be either in the workshop or in a truck parked further away. To distract Molly, he continued to stir up the topic of traveling together. About a week before April 1st, he proposed to her. Let's leave right in the morning of the 1st so as not to waste the day. Super, Molly exclaimed. I'll just pack everything this evening, food, things, warm jackets, and I'll go to bed early. Great, Garrett nodded. And then I'll check the car at night so that I can leave without delays. Molly was confused. At night, maybe early to get some sleep? It's okay, he waved it off. Not for the first time. I just want to do a full diagnostic. She did not argue, although she noticed that he sometimes spoke about his night affairs with an incomprehensible wariness. But she blamed everything on his responsibility. After all, Garrett had always been a scrupulous person who did not like unpleasant surprises on the road. Molly's preparation for the spring trip was touching. She went to the camping equipment store and bought a new flask and thermos. In the evenings, I enthusiastically packed a backpack with all sorts of little things, a blanket, thermal underwear, a first aid kit, and even saved a bottle of wine for a romantic evening. She wanted to believe that this little trip would finally restore their lost intimacy. And Garrett, seeing her efforts, only thought coldly, did she prepare the same way when she left for Mark? Or maybe she rejoiced at their secret meetings, and every time a dark resentment boiled up in his chest, which he no longer tried to soften. On the contrary, resentment fueled determination. The day before the supposed departure, it was Friday, March 31st. The sun was clear, albeit cold. Molly finished all her household chores early and, satisfied, sat down on the sofa with her phone. She wanted to talk to her mother one last time, to tell her that everything was looking up for them and that she and Garrett were going away for the weekend. But at that moment, he entered the living room, holding some printed paper. Molly, he said casually, I have official notice here. I am eliminating your position in the workshop. Mike issued the order, and here's to let you know. She blinked, looking at him in confusion. Are you liquidating? Well, I haven't worked there for a long time, and you said that we won't advertise it. Garrett shrugged. The time has come. Businesses don't need a fictitious assistant position. We will do everything quietly, without publicity, but legally, from today, you are not registered. Molly felt a slight pang. She understood that she was no longer involved in the affairs of the workshop, but for some reason this formality still cut into her heart, reminding her of her mistakes. However, she decided not to make a scene. Understand. Thanks for warning. It's good that you have a few hours if you need to sign retroactive resignation papers. You can do it now. Garrett handed her a pen. She nodded and signed almost automatically. Just a year and a half ago, when she communicated with Mark and helped keep accounts, it seemed to her that she enjoyed her husband's trust and was making a contribution to the common cause. Now it's all officially over. Maybe it's for the better, Molly thought, trying to be optimistic. But there will be no reason to remember Mark and my betrayal. In addition, she decided, after all, tomorrow we are going, finally, together. What difference does it make where I'm listed? Garrett put the paper in a folder and said, Great, I'll do the rest myself. His voice sounded even, his face was inscrutable. Then he looked at his watch. I'll go to the workshop for a while to finish some work. I'll be back by night. For now, pack your things as planned. Okay, Molly answered, barely hiding her slight alarm. Seeing him off, she tried to hug him, but he only nodded briefly and went outside. Probably just tired, she thought, closing the door behind him. At dusk, Garrett crossed the city and drove into a workshop where there were no longer any employees. Mike, having waited for him, appeared from the utility room. There was concern on the face of the senior mechanic. Well, are you ready? He asked quietly. Tomorrow, Garrett answered. In the morning she will wake up, and I will no longer be there. Mike shook his head. I hope you've thought it through. It's still, tough. I know, Garrett muttered, but I won't give up. They walked into the office, where Garrett took his spare jacket and keys from a wall hook. On the table, there was a box containing some personal belongings, documents, folders, tools. Mike looked around. So you're taking everything out? Yes, so as not to leave traces. While she sleeps, I'll take everything else from the house. There is not much in there, mostly things in a suitcase. I put something away beforehand. He paused, searching for words. Glover will come in the morning and change the locks. Don't you feel sorry for leaving everything behind? Mike asked gloomily, waving his hand towards the photographs that used to decorate the office. Now there were only empty traces of buttons. Garrett didn't answer. Fragments of memories and cold determination fought inside him. Finally, he said, "It's a pity for everything that used to be real." But she ruined it herself. Mike realized that it was too late to convince his friend. He sighed. Okay, I'll be in touch tomorrow. If you need anything, call me. And Harry, take care of yourself, do you hear? It's still hard. Yes, Garrett nodded curtly. Thank you, Mike. Without you, I couldn't have done it with the business and everything else. Good luck, was all the mechanic managed to say, watching as Garrett took the box and headed for the exit. Outside, the wind was getting stronger. The weather in March is always unpredictable. During the day it was sunny, then windy, then rain and snow. Garrett looked into the sky, where rare stars twinkled, and felt something like an echo in his soul. If she hadn't betrayed me, if it weren't for that April Fool's nightmare. But he shook his head and got into the pickup truck, driving away doubts. The game went on until the end. When he returned home after midnight, the light in the living room was on. Molly was clearly waiting for him. As soon as Garrett entered, she rushed to him. You took a very long time. I was already worried. There's a lot to do, he muttered, undressing and trying not to look into her eyes. Maybe a cup of tea? She asked. Tomorrow it's early to get up. I want to calm down a little before the road. Garrett nodded, pretending to agree. They sat down at the kitchen table. Molly poured hot mint tea into mugs and placed a saucer with crackers. She herself looked at her husband with warmth and hope. You know, I've already packed everything, she said with a smile, and food, thermos, and warm clothes. I am sure that we will have a good time. Let's remember our first trip. Garrett put on a slight smile. Yeah, it'll probably be great. Molly did not notice how his lips trembled. She wanted to believe that he was just tired and would soon thaw out. She paused, then timidly asked, Listen, sorry, maybe this is an inappropriate question, but did I understand correctly that we will be there together for a couple of days? Will we really afford the weekend? Yes, Garrett took a sip of his tea. I told Mike to cover me in the workshop. Excellent. Molly smiled. You see, we have been waiting for this moment. Sometimes it seems that we are still. We haven't talked to the end yet, but maybe we don't need to. Everything will heal itself if we are together, right? He put the mug down. Maybe, yes. Maybe not. Let's see. There was bitterness in my soul. He saw Molly looking with devoted eyes, not at all expecting a stab in the back. But I didn't expect a blow from her a year ago. Evil flashed through my thoughts. He mechanically stood up from the table. I think I'll take a shower and go to bed, and it wouldn't hurt for you to rest. Of course, she nodded, following him with her gaze. At night in the bedroom, they lay next to each other, but Garrett definitely stayed on the edge, as if he was afraid to touch. Molly tried to sleep, but her heart was uneasy. He's somehow too tense, she thought. Maybe he's just afraid that I'll deceive him again. No, no. I've proven 1,000 times that I only want to be with him. And exhausted, she fell into an uneasy sleep closer to morning. Garrett waited until her breathing became completely even, and only then he silently rose from the bed. Soon he began to pack his last belongings, his most valuable clothes, photos, work tools, and a laptop. He put all this in bags. He froze several times, listening to rustling noises to see if Molly would wake up. But she seemed to be sleeping soundly. Dawn was approaching. A grayish half-light began to appear in the windows. Garrett placed his bags by the door and put on his jacket and boots. His heart was beating heavily, but he did not allow himself to stray from his intended path. Before leaving, he left an envelope on the kitchen table containing a copy of the contract for the sale of the house to Martin Glover, dated last autumn, a copy of the agreement transferring the business to Mike, dated summer, an extract from the previous general account, where the balance was 0. The letter is short, just a couple of lines. Molly, today is April 1st. I hope you enjoyed my prank. Your ex-husband. P.S. Don't call me, it's useless. That's it, he whispered to himself. Now she will understand what it's like. He tiptoed into the living room, picked up the last bag, and looked around again. The house he had once built as a fortress for his love was now empty, the valuables he had taken leaving bare areas on the shelves and walls. My soul felt both bitter and strangely cold. She destroyed this place a year ago, he hammered into his mind. And I'm just finishing what I started. Garrett quietly left, closing the door. He got into the pickup truck, started the engine, and headed away. Outside the gates of the house, near the next block, stood Martin Glover's car with a team he promised to drive up at dawn to change the locks and formally take over. Garrett just nodded at them without stopping. Glover got out of the car. It was clear that he was getting ready for work. Two men with tools and boxes stood nearby. Everything is going according to plan, flashed through my head. Garrett stepped on the gas and soon disappeared around the bend, leaving behind a house that was about to finally cease to be his and Molly's family nest. It had barely struck 7 in the morning when the alarm on Molly's phone went off in the Rivers' bedroom. She opened her eyes with difficulty, sleepy after a restless night. It took a few seconds to realize, today is April 1st, the day we have to leave. A joyful thought came to mind. She reached out her hand to Garrett, but came across an empty, cold spot on the sheet. "Harry?" she called, sitting up in bed. The clock showed 7:03. Silence. No sounds from the bathroom, no footsteps in the hallway. Molly thought that he had probably already gotten up and gone to get the car ready or drink coffee. Jumping up, she put on her robe and went downstairs, confident that she would now find her husband at breakfast. However, the kitchen was empty. There was no voice in the house at all. "Harry," she shouted louder. 0 reaction. My heart sank. Molly walked around the living room, looked into the office, even looked into the pantry where they kept their tools. No one. She noticed that something important was missing from the house, but at first she did not understand what it was. The furnishings looked as usual, except for a few empty spaces on the shelves. And then her gaze fell on the table in the kitchen, where there was a white envelope signed with only one word, Molly. Garrett's handwriting, no doubt. Before she had time to extend her hand to him, the front door behind her suddenly opened slightly. Molly turned around with relief, thinking that it was Garrett who had returned, but an unfamiliar middle-aged man in work clothes stood on the threshold, and behind him another was holding a box with some tools. Sorry, he was confused when he saw Molly. Who are you? I live here, Molly frowned in despair. What are you doing here? How did you get there? We have the keys, miss, the man answered confusedly. Mr. Glover told us. We need to come in the morning and change the locks. Maybe you. The landlady, they didn't tell you. What kind of nonsense? She breathed, feeling her heart pounding in her throat. Which keys, which Glover? At that moment, Martin Glover himself appeared in the doorway. Molly had not met him before, but he knew her from a photo from the documents. Seeing the confused woman, he took the workers aside and turned to Molly. Good morning. Mrs. Rivers, I take it. I am Martin Glover, the official owner of this house since October last year. He spoke politely but firmly, sensing that the situation could get out of control, and Molly looked at him with round eyes. Official owner. Since October? Are you kidding? This house belongs to Garrett and me. I'm sorry, Glover sighed, but your husband sold the house in the fall and at the same time signed a lease until the spring. And yesterday he called and said that he was moving out on April 1st, and asked to come change the locks. Here we are. The words beat like hammer blows in Molly's brain. Sold your house in the fall, lease agreement, is he moving out on April 1st? It all sounded like a nightmare. Unable to bear the buzzing in her head any longer, she grabbed the envelope from the table and frantically opened it. There really were papers there, dry legal documents, copies of contracts and extracts confirming that the house had long belonged to Glover and the Rocky Auto Workshop belonged to Mike. And on top was a short note. Molly, today is April 1st. I hope you enjoyed my prank. Your ex-husband. P.S. Don't call me, it's useless. While reading these lines, the floor dragged her down and her head began to spin. She automatically took a couple of hesitant steps back, grabbing the chair so as not to fall. Glover said something, inviting her to discuss it calmly, but she no longer heard. My heart was pounding deafeningly. So, all these months, the whole ostentatious reconciliation process was a hoax. He quietly withdrew the money, sold the business and the house, and left her with nothing. And he chose April 1st for the strike, the same day when a year ago she made the joke. No, Molly gasped. This can't be. With shaking fingers, she took out her phone and dialed Garrett's number. The subscriber is unavailable, the voice of the answering machine automatically repeated. Molly tried again, then typed in a frantic message. Harry, what's going on? Come back. This is some kind of monstrous mistake. But the answer is only silence. It looks like he really disabled the old SIM card or blocked its number. Miss, Glover addressed her carefully, you're probably in shock. Maybe you'll sit down. I can give you a little time to collect your things. But alas, the house now belongs to me. Molly slowly looked up at him, full of despair. But I have nowhere to go. Glover threw up his hands sadly. I understand. But your husband signed an agreement that he is vacating the premises today. I'm sorry. It was clear from Glover's eyes. He sees how this woman's life is crumbling, but from his point of view, this is a purely legal issue, and he does not want to get caught in a showdown. He has already invested money and expects to begin repairs. And Molly heard her own breathing, interrupted by sobs. Just recently, she was convinced that she and Garrett were about to go on a romantic trip, and now, it's all over. And the house, and the marriage, and the business, and her naive belief in reconciliation. Give me at least a little time, she asked in a choked voice. I'll pack my things and leave. Of course, nodded Glover. I'll be outside, waiting. He walked out, gesturing for the workers not to touch the locks just yet. Molly remained standing in the middle of the kitchen, mechanically clutching the envelope with papers to her chest. There were tears in my eyes. Shock, bitterness, and confusion choked her. Moving with difficulty, like a sleepwalker, she went upstairs and saw. The closets were empty. Men's shirts, trousers, even some of her gifts to her husband had disappeared. And then it dawned on Molly. Garrett had been preparing for a long time, taking things out while she didn't notice anything. Lord, what a fool I was, she whispered, sinking exhaustively on the edge of the bed. How long she sat there is unknown. Maybe a minute, maybe 10, before she remembered that there were strangers downstairs, and now they would finally put her out on the street. Gasping, she opened her bag and felt for her wallet and phone. She began to fussily throw clothes there, although her hands were shaking so much that they barely got into the zippers. Where to go? How can I find him? Thoughts were racing in my head. The number is unavailable, and Mark has long disappeared from the city. My parents live in another town, but why go to them now? We'll have to. After all, judging by her zero balance, she has almost no money. Through the walls, I could hear the workers below talking about locks. Molly swallowed a lump of tears and, somehow crumpling her clothes into a travel bag, trudged downstairs. Glover met her with a sympathetic but unyielding look. Mrs. Rivers, we can take you to the bus if you have nothing to get there. No, thanks, I have a car, Molly answered quietly. Thank God, the car belonged to her personally even before her marriage. Molly left the house and walked along the porch, noticing that the lock on the front door had already been opened and was ready to be replaced. Large snowflakes lazily flew from the low, cloudy sky. "Harry," she repeated in a whisper, clutching the strap of her bag. It seemed to her that the mocking laughter of fate was visible in every snowflake. April 1st. April Fool's Day. How symbolic. She started the car. Her hands were shaking. Tears blurred her eyes. "Get yourself together," she told herself. "The main thing is to get out of here." I looked back for the last time at the house where happy years had passed. Now Glover's people were changing the locks there, and she, Molly, was left with nothing, without a husband, without a roof over her head, and without an understanding of what to do next. The car started moving, and she pulled out onto the road, frantically wiping her wet cheeks. "I need to call my parents," she decided, and when she had driven away enough to not see the house, she fumbled for the phone. But the outburst of tears came again, to such an extent that she was forced to stop on the side of the road, park, and burst into tears, dropping her head on the steering wheel. "How could I be so blind?" she moaned in her heart. All these months, Garrett pretended, did not show strong emotions, played the role of "I forgive, I forget," and in the end he did to her the same thing that she once made him feel, only in a much more cruel form. This is revenge, she realized. I planted the bomb myself a year ago, and today it exploded. I remembered all his distant glances, dry words, rare surges of warmth, which, most likely, were calculated steps. Pain permeated the entire being. It seemed as if the world had collapsed, and there was no way out from under the rubble. After many minutes of hysteria, Molly wiped her face, somehow calmed down, and, turning on the engine, drove towards the highway leading out of the town. "We need to find somewhere to spend the night. Maybe we should really go to our parents," she thought, sobbing. But there remained a small spark of despair inside. What if I still see him? What if he didn't go far? I don't believe he could have thought it all through like that. For the first time, she realized that Garrett was capable of calculation when it came to retaliating. The car slowly pulled out of the street where the former house was located. A curtain of wet snow covered the porch, the doors were locked, and Molly could see in the rearview mirror the workers carrying some tools inside. "That's it. This is no longer our home," she thought while tears flowed in streams again. So April 1st became for Molly the most terrible day in her life, much more terrible than the joking prank that she played on her husband a year ago. And unlike her idea at the time, there was no return here. Garrett did everything so that she could not find him, could not even return at least something from their common property. In an instant, she lost everything she thought she still had. Snow and drizzle lashed the windshield, as if reflecting the chaos going on in Molly's soul. It took her several hours to get to the neighboring town where her mother lived. The road was a gray film, wet, slippery. Molly nearly fell off the road several times because she kept crying and losing concentration. But still, by lunchtime, she stopped the car at a familiar one-story house. Her mother greeted her with a frightened sigh. "My child, what happened? You're all pale. Where's Garrett?" He disappeared," was all Molly could squeeze out, bursting into tears. Seeing her condition, the mother clutched her heart, took her daughter into the house, sat her down on the sofa, gave her a blanket and hot tea. Gradually, Molly, trembling finely, told in fragments how her husband sold everything behind her back, leaving her without everything on the day when they were planning to go out into the countryside together. The mother shook her head in shock for a long time, saying, "How can this be? For what?" But having heard about last year, about Molly's betrayal, about what joke she played then, she only mournfully said, "Daughter, I understand that you were wrong, but such an answer." So Molly stayed to live with her mother. She spent the entire April in a state of semi-shock, like a person who survived an earthquake. She did not understand what to rely on, where to get strength. She did not have a job, since all contacts and recommendations were previously based on her status as the wife of the workshop owner. Some personal savings remained, but they were crumbs. Friends, having learned about what had happened, tried to support, but few could imagine the full scale of the tragedy. Molly wrote to Garrett at his old number silence, tried to find him on social networks to no avail. It seemed that he had erased all traces and disappeared in an unknown direction. A week passed, then another. At the end of April, Molly accidentally learned from someone she knew that Rocky Auto was now 100% owned by Mike. No one really knew where Garrett was. Mike remained silent. They say he did not communicate with the boss after the deal. It seemed as if he had disappeared into the spring haze. There were all sorts of rumors that Garrett had gone to another state, that he had taken refuge in the mountains, that he had flown abroad. But no one knew the reliable facts. At the same time, in another state, far from his previous home, Garrett was sitting on the veranda of a small cottage by the lake. The area was reminiscent of his native mountain landscapes, but here, at least, no one knew him. The documents for renting the cottage were issued in the new name of a company owned by his lawyer. Garrett himself wanted to lie low until he decided what to do next. Revenge was accomplished, and now he had to sort out his own feelings. Did he really feel satisfied? He placed the laptop on a wooden table, connected the mobile internet, and opened a new email account created under a fictitious name. Several letters from Mike, where he wrote about the workshop's bills, lay unread. Garrett exhaled heavily. I don't even want to talk to him now. Finally, he clicked to view his mailing list and saw an email from Molly, or rather, from her new account. She had found his email, which was once for personal purposes, and begged him to respond. The subject line was, "Please say a word." Garrett stared blankly at this for several minutes, remembering how a year ago he himself begged her to come back, using similar words. I opened the letter. It turned out to be short. Molly wrote that she understood how everything sounded, begged for a chance to explain herself, claimed that she loved him and was ready to do anything if only he would listen. I'm sorry. I realized how much pain I caused you. But Harry, you responded 1,000 times worse. Please don't leave me in emptiness. That was the last line. Garrett finished reading and sat motionless for a long time, clasping his hands. Answered 1,000 times worse. Maybe so, but didn't she deserve it? The inner voice sounded harsh. However, now that everything had already happened, he could not leave the feeling of emptiness. He didn't feel real jubilation, only some kind of doom. Well, I crossed her out, took revenge. What next? Hesitating for a long time, he finally decided to answer. One line to let her know I'm out of reach, he thought. The fingers froze over the keys, then quickly tapped. It was a prank, Molly. Your idea, remember? Now you feel everything yourself. Goodbye. Don't write to me anymore. I won't come back. Garrett. He pressed send. My heart skipped a beat, but no relief came. Before closing the laptop, I noticed the date on the system clock, April 14th. Exactly 2 weeks have passed since that very morning when he left the house. It seems like an eternity, he said to himself. Getting up from the table, he went out onto the porch. A lake stretched before my eyes, calm, with a slightly rippling surface in the wind. Foreign shores, foreign trees. Garrett peered into the water, trying to catch even a hint of the peace of mind he hoped to find after revenge. But instead, he was haunted by fragments of memories. Here Molly laughs, exposing her face to the sun's rays, but here she is crying after he exposed her. Mixed feelings crowded in his chest. Maybe one day this will all calm down, Garrett thought. Although, who am I kidding? I will never be the same again, and she does too. He went back inside and slammed the laptop shut, leaving a notification on the screen that the email had been successfully delivered. There were papers on the table, documents for a new trust, new bank accounts. He had a choice ahead of him to stay alone, starting from scratch, or to go somewhere else, far away. Life continued, although it lost its colors. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.